Good morning, and welcome to the Chiefs briefing for the November 5th, 2024 presidential election. Thank you to all of you as Chiefs and Assistant Chiefs for joining us this morning as we go over important updates and reminders for the upcoming presidential election. As a reminder, the Fairfax County Electoral Board is composed of 3 members, including the Honorable Chairman Kate Hanley, the Vice Chairman Jeff Shapiro, and the Secretary, Retired Ambassador Christopher Hensel. We're also pleased to have our General Registrar and Director of Elections, Eric Spicer, with us this morning, and our Deputy Director and Deputy General Registrar, Cheryl Jones. Eric, would you like to say a few words to all of our lovely Chiefs and Assistant Chiefs with us this morning?
Yes, I sure would. Thank you, Robbie. I want first and foremost to thank all the chiefs and assistant chiefs. The assistant chiefs, who used to be chiefs in many instances, you bring your knowledge and experience and wisdom, and you're working so well together, the chief and assistant chief. We're finding that in the satellites, and we have found that in the election day precincts. What we keep saying, you may have heard me say this in the podcast if you watched it with the county executive that came out a few weeks ago, or in other places. This is our Super Bowl. We're probably in the fourth quarter now. It's going very well. You probably heard the turnout at the satellites has been quite high. In many cases, double what it was 4 years ago, but on average about 40% higher. So what that means for you is probably a smaller turnout than we'd otherwise expect. We thought we'd get about half the turnout on election day. Now it's going to be a little bit less than that. But make no mistake, even though the turnout will be lower at the precincts on election day than for a typical election, you will have just as many challenges. You will have what we call the cicada voters that only come out every 4 years. You will have probably a huge number of same-day registrations, which you've got in specialized training. You have 2 same-day registration experts, and you'll get all the other complications. People who haven't voted in a while, people who may have moving conditions. So plenty of things to deal with, and that's why we count on you so much. You are backed up by the fantastic staff, starting with Robbie and the excellent manager, Gretchen and Sean Rogers. They have done an outstanding job. Sean has done more training, I think, than I've ever seen, more than this office has done. So you have many other people backing you up. If you're not sure about something, please call. We have a fantastic voter registration team. Across the board, we have the best people in place that I've ever seen. So I think it's going to be a fantastic day. Can you believe it? Just 2 weeks until the election. So thank you very much, and looking forward to a great day.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a little nerve-wracking to have our Super Bowl in November, but it truly is exciting for all of us. Cheryl, would you like to say something?
Just to echo Eric, we really appreciate the chiefs and assistant chiefs that come back. We couldn't do it without you. We really appreciate that you're getting more and more knowledge every year. And we also appreciate the new chiefs and assistant chiefs for being brave and stepping up. And I know some of you may be a little concerned that you're taking on a really big job, but just remember, you've got the whole office here behind you. Our whole job is to support election day and early voting activities. You guys are at the top, we're at the bottom holding you up. So that on election day, that translates into don't hesitate to give us a call. And I know that you're going to hear this in your training, you're going to hear it in the briefing all the way through, but it's so important. We don't want you to make a mistake. We're here to help you out. If you have any questions at all, and it's going to be busy, it's going to be hectic, don't try to figure it out. Read the manual, give us a call. We have lots of people waiting. And other than that, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Eric and Cheryl. We really appreciate having you both with us today, and also just being leaders for our office and for all of our election officers. I'm pleased to be joined by a number of staff for this briefing. First off, my name is Ravi Udeshi, and I serve as our election manager, and I oversee the different teams that handle in-person voting here in the county. We also have Gretchen Coleman, our election officer manager, Sean Rogers, our training and operations manager, Jean Tenson, training and operations specialist, and Susan Burnell and Steve Wake, members of our training and operations team. Together, we're going to take you through the important information and help direct the questions and answers during this briefing. In terms of our agenda today, we have a number of different topics to go through. This is a large and complex presidential election, so do give us some time to go through all these important topics. I'm going to provide an overview of the election and go through some of the things that are new. Gretchen will take you through some important reminders about things to do before Election Day. We'll go through the procedures for opening the polls and important reminders for during the day, things to keep in mind as you close the polls. Then we'll circle back and go in depth into some situations involving non-routine voters and provisional situations. Those are really important to handle correctly in this election, and we want to give them the time it deserves. We'll also handle some important updates and new information regarding emergency procedures and evacuation procedures. And then we'll take your questions and answers at the end of this briefing. We think all told this will take about 2 hours. All right, let's go into an overview of this election. First and foremost, what's different in a presidential election like this? Well, if you've never served in a presidential election before, what I can tell you is that it's the same procedures and processes as we usually have, but there's just more of everything. There's more voters that show up to vote in a presidential election than any other election. There's more non-routine voter situations than you deal with in other voters. Because as Eric said, we get cicada voters, folks who haven't voted in some years may show up and they may have non-routine situations that you have to deal with. We'll have more provisional voters and provisional situations. We think we may have anywhere from 10,000 to 25,000 provisional ballots this election, which is about 3 to 4 times as many as we've gotten in past elections. And just in general, just more issues that may occur on Election Day. But as Cheryl said, we are just a phone call away. If you have any issues or unexpected situations on Election Day that you don't know how to handle, give us a call. We have tons of staff here in the office, and we're more than happy to help support you and figure out the resolution to anything. So again, it's the same procedures that we've followed in past elections. It's the same type of situations you've dealt with before, just more of them. But if you have anything that requires help, call us. As always, you'll be issued a Chief's Notebook, which is an important manual that goes over all the information you need to know for the election. Make sure to review the table of contents and familiarize yourself with the contents of the notebook before Election Day. There's also a new section of the notebook this election regarding evacuation procedures. And if you did not serve in the June election, there are a number of other updates that we made to the notebook that you'll see when you receive yours. You should have already received a PDF by email, and you'll receive a printed copy either when you come to the Chief Open House over the next 2 days or in your final supply pickup. All right, what type of resources will you have available in your precinct this election? Well, depending on the number of voters in your precinct, you'll receive anywhere from 3 to 6 poll pads to help have enough check-in lines. You'll receive 2 express votes and 2 DS200s in every precinct. You'll receive 2 admin tablets. So in the past, we used to issue 1 admin tablet to each precinct. This time we'll have 2. And we're issuing enough ballots for 85% to 100% of your active registered voters. We believe that's more than enough ballots than what you'll need in this election. But if you do run short for any reason, we're able to bring out more ballots to you. In terms of the people in this election, you will have 0 to 4 high school pages. We're very excited. This was our most successful high school page season ever. We have more than 700 high school pages that applied to serve in this election. And we've done our best to distribute them all around the county. There are some precincts where unfortunately there weren't very many pages nearby. So if your precinct doesn't have any pages, it's because there wasn't anyone who lived near there. But in many cases, you'll have a page both in the morning and in the afternoon. And in some cases, you may have 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. You'll also have anywhere from 9 to a total of 18 election officers, which includes the chief, the assistant chief, collector officers, and provisional specialists. Now, in terms of your provisional specialists, as we said, there's a high chance of a large number of provisional ballots this election. So we're issuing 2 provisional specialists to every precinct so that you can be prepared for any situations that arise. Also, for the 2 admin tablets that we're issuing to each precinct, one of those admin tablets will be shared by the chief and assistant chief to handle their part of the process, and the other admin tablet will be shared by the provisional specialists. If you voted already, then you may have seen your ballot, which looks like the one here, the image that you can see on your screen. There are a number of contests on the front and back of the ballot. On the front, you'll have contests for electors for US President and Vice President, US Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, which will either be the 8th, 10th, or 11th Congressional District. And on the back, you'll have contests for a proposed Virginia constitutional amendment and 2 proposed Fairfax County bond issues. Now, when it comes to the amendments and the bonds, by law, we're required to issue different brochures and flyers to every precinct that you will then distribute to voters. So for the proposed constitutional amendment, you're going to get a trifold brochure in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Korean. You'll have about 200 of the English and about 50 of the other languages on average. And what you want your officers to do is to distribute those to voters waiting in line to check in to vote. So as voters are in line, you want to distribute the amendment brochures as well as the bond flyers. There are 2 bonds on the ballot, and these flyers are double-sided. They'll have 1 bond issue on the front and 1 bond issue on the back. And both the brochures and the flyers are there to help explain in plain English what the amendment and bond questions are that are on the ballot. Now, again, you distribute these to voters that are in line to vote, but it's very important to then collect and redistribute these materials. So as voters finish their voting process and scan their ballot, you want to place a box somewhere so they can put back in the box, and you can grab those and redistribute those to voters in line. We don't have enough of these to hand to every single voter a brand new one, so we want to make sure you're collecting them and redistributing them. All right, one of the differences in a presidential election is that there are multiple ballot types in each precinct. The vast majority of voters will vote a full ballot. That's a ballot with all the contests that we've already gone over. But there are some situations in which a voter may need to vote a different type of ballot. What are those? First, you have federal-only ballots. These are for voters who are marked on the poll book as federal-only voters. A federal-only voter is typically someone who has moved overseas permanently, but has chosen to return to the United States to vote a ballot. So for an individual who shows up on the poll pad labeled as federal only, you would issue them a federal only ballot. Another situation is a presidential only ballot. If a voter has moved out of the state of Virginia, then only in a presidential election can they come back and still vote a ballot. But that is a special type of ballot that only has 1 contest for the presidential contest. So again, these 2 situations are: 1, a federal-only ballot is for voters who are marked in the poll book as requiring a federal-only ballot. So the poll pad will tell you if you have to give them a federal-only ballot. And the other is if a voter tells you that they've moved out of Virginia and it's on or after October 6th, which is 30 days before the election, then you would issue them a presidential-only ballot. So 1, it'll tell you on the poll book. The other one will be based on if the voter tells you they've moved. But for both of these alternative ballot styles, they will be handled on the express vote. So let me repeat that. You're going to have paper ballots for your full ballots. That's what most voters are going to get, the vast majority of voters. But for the small percentage of voters that may need to vote a federal-only ballot or a presidential-only ballot, they're going to vote that on the express vote. And you would help start that process for them. So in terms of using the express vote, just a reminder that first, an election officer, whether it's you or one of your delegated officers, would insert a blank express vote card into the express vote machine. Then on the screen, you have to select the ballot type, whether it's a full ballot, a presidential-only ballot, a federal-only ballot. Please be very careful with that. You or your election officers may see presidential on the screen and select presidential. That is not correct for most voters. For the vast majority of voters, you would select a full ballot so they can vote on all the contests. After you've done that, you can help the voter customize the screen if needed, if they need adjustments for text size, display contrast, or to pick a different language. And then the process goes to the voter. They make their vote selections on the screen, print their card, and then can scan their express vote card on the DS200 scanner. And we are issuing a new express vote during the day guide in your Chief's notebook to help with this, as well as a separate handout. We suggest just take that handout and tape it to the express vote. So it's right there if and when you have a voter that needs to use the express vote, whether because they're voting a federal-only ballot, presidential-only ballot, or just has chosen to use the express vote to vote their normal ballot. So again, you may very well have cases, more than in the past, where a voter will have to use the express vote because of an alternative ballot style. All right, now let's take you through some of the other things that are new for this election. Just some small changes we've made to help improve the process. First, you always have your opening envelope, and there are now 2 labels on this because this envelope contains both the purple setup guides that you use during your pre-election Monday setup, as well as a green opening label because it has the green guides that you use during opening procedures on election morning. In your equipment cage, you have the DS200s in there, and there's some things that we want you to be aware of. Underneath the DS200, underneath one of them, you'll have a clear plastic bin that has some small materials. Also, there will be a cardboard box now containing some important materials inside one of the DS200 bins. And one or both of your DS200 bins will have the blank ballots inside. So just to be aware of that. Also, in terms of inside your equipment cage, the blue bag, the blue supply bag, has more materials than ever before, so it's going to be fairly heavy. As well as the DS200 bin, because it contains all those ballots, it will also be heavy. Please be very careful as you remove supplies from your equipment cage. In addition to the standard blue and red vote arrows that we give you, in this election, we're also phasing in some new yellow vote arrows. So you'll have a combination of yellow, blue, and red arrows that you can use as appropriate. We are issuing every precinct 2 sets of this firearms prohibited sign. So Virginia law prohibits firearms and ammunition in a polling place. And so now you'll have a sign that you can post at your building door and your voting room entrance to remind voters of this fact. We spent a lot of time thinking about de-escalation this election season. A few weeks ago, we conducted a de-escalation techniques webinar with our partners from CISA, a federal agency, and that video is available in the election officer portal if you'd like to watch. It's about an hour long. We also have some information in the Chief's notebook, and that will be provided to you as separate handouts about de-escalating difficult situations and using the CLARA method to help bring the tenor of these situations down. So we highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a look at the de-escalation techniques webinar and definitely to review the de-escalation information in the notebook. The Virginia Department of Elections has updated a couple of forms this year. So one is the Virginia Request for Assistance form, if someone needs to help a voter in marking or translating their ballot, as well as the ID confirmation statement, which is offered to voters who may not have any other acceptable form of ID. The forms are substantially similar to what they were before, all the same fields. The presentation is a bit different. So do take a look at those either in the notebook or in your printed materials to be familiar with them. This is a federal election, and in a federal election, you may have voters who previously registered to vote by mail. And if this is the first federal election in which they are voting, there are slightly different ID requirements for them. So you might see this poll pad prompt on the screen for those voters. Just follow the instructions on the screen. And if they don't have an acceptable ID, there are detailed instructions in what if number 1 in your Chief's notebook for how to handle that. But if you have any questions about this, feel free to call us on election day. The voter referral worksheet is a document that we made significant updates to in the June election. So if you did not work in the June election, be aware this is very different than what it was before. And Sean's going to take you through that later in our briefing today. For this election, we did make some minor updates. And notably, this form is now begun by the chief or assistant chief. Essentially, the front of the form is completed by the chief or assistant chief, and the back of the form is completed by the provisional specialist. So you no longer need to require your check-in officers to start this form. They can just, as in years past, yell out chief when they need help, refer a non-routine voter to you, and then you can start the process for the voter referral worksheet, which is required for any non-routine voter that may become a provisional voter. The provisional envelope has been updated in this election due to changes from the Virginia Department of Elections. So it's not so much the content of the envelope as the way it's been formatted. So notably, on the back of the envelope, the information at the top that you can see on the right image, the image on the right of your screen, we have some office use only information. It is not your job to check yes or no on that part of the envelope. And the flap of the envelope is now on the right side. So as in past elections, For any provisional voter, if it's a same-day registration, the voter and the election officer would complete the front of the envelope, the one that you see on the left. Or if it's any other provisional situation, it would be the other side of the envelope, the back side that you see on the right there. And again, Sean will go through this in more detail. We also are issuing provisional overlays in this election. So let's take a look at what those look like. The provisional overlays are plastic overlays that you place on top of a provisional envelope, and they will show you all required fields. So if a voter has filled in their envelope, but let's say they forgot to fill in one given field, and the provisional specialist places this on top of the envelope, they will see that that area is not filled in. And that's a cue to remind the voter to fill in that field. In past elections, we issued an overlay for the SDR side of the envelope. In this election, we're issuing overlays for both sides of the envelope, and we're issuing you 2 sets of each. So you'll get 4 overlays in total, 2 for the SDR side, 2 for the other side. So each provisional specialist can have a set. Here's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, closing the polls. I remember my first election as a chief, it took us almost 2.5 hours to finish our procedures. And by the last time I was a chief, we'd whittled it down to 45 minutes. The difference over time was I learned how to better delegate and verify our tasks, and work in better coordination with the election officers in my precinct. What we've done now is we've put this diagram in your chief's notebook. And if you've come to one of our closing procedures workshops, it may look familiar. This diagram helps you better understand what tasks can be done in parallel and what tasks you can delegate to your election officers versus which ones you should do yourself as the chief or assistant chief. The key here is most tasks can be done by your regular election officers, and you should really make sure to delegate those to your officers, and then you as the chief or assistant chief to simply verify that they are being done correctly. I want to point out a couple important parts of this diagram and your overall closing process. First, closing begins before 7 o'clock. That is to say, you want to start preparing before polls close, including distributing guides to your election officers and completing election officer evaluations. As soon as the polls close at 7 p.m. or after the last voter in line has voted, you have 3 key tasks you're trying to complete: closing your drop box, sealing and packing your provisional envelopes, and closing the DS200s. Because once those are done, the collector officers can leave with the materials they have to leave with. The next part of the process of closing is getting certain tasks done that allow for the closing numbers worksheet to be complete. Because once that's done, then you can start working on the SOR and other materials. If you haven't come to a closing procedures workshop yet, we strongly encourage you to do so, and we have some still coming up between now and Election Day. Otherwise, do take a look at this information in the Chief's notebook when you receive it. The piece of the closing process that we always heard about is the most stressful for chiefs and assistant chiefs is completing the statement of results. There's a lot of numbers to juggle, and it's hard to remember what to do after you've been working for 16 hours on Election Day. Well, we're rolling out a new tool in this election to really help you with this process. On the admin tablet, there is a new app called the SOR Helper. What this does is it's going to make it much easier for you to understand what numbers go on the SOR and where they go. So let me briefly walk you through this. First, your regular election officers complete the closing numbers worksheet. That's a new form that we introduced earlier this year that collects all the key closing numbers in one place. Once the election officers have completed the closing numbers worksheet, then what you can do is take that form, walk over to the admin tablet, open the SOR Helper app, and type in all of those numbers. It's going to ask you just to copy the numbers in the same order that they are on the closing numbers worksheet. And once you're finished, you go through 2 screens, enter the information. It does some double checking to make sure there's no discrepancies in your numbers and gives you an opportunity to fix them if there are. Once you press finish, the SOR Helper app will generate an image of what your completed statement of results should look like. So again, you type in the numbers from your closing numbers worksheet, and the SOR Helper app will figure out where all the numbers go on the SOR. It'll do all the addition and other math for you, and give you an image of here's what your SOR should look like. Just copy these down to your paper SOR. We're really excited about how this might be able to help you during your closing process. But I need to stress, using the SOR Helper app is not an alternative to completing your paper SOR. The last step of the process is still copying all the numbers down from the SOR Helper app on the admin tablet onto your actual paper SORs, and then having election officers sign them. This tool is optional, so if you're happy with how you've done the SOR in the past and you don't think you need the additional help, that's okay. You're welcome to do it the way you've always done it. But we hope for many of you for whom this can be stressful, that this app will now help make that process less stressful and easier for you during your closing procedures. But as always, give us a call if you need help. Finally, one last new thing I want to share with you is that we are excited to bring back commemorative pins for election officers. We're very, very excited about this. Every precinct is going to have enough pins for all of your election officers and all of your high school pages. You'll see some of us as staff wearing them during our open house the next few days, and we hope that all of you choose to wear yours on and after Election Day. So be on the lookout for that. We're very happy and excited to be able to be issuing you pins again. All right, let's do a quick knowledge check to see if you've been paying attention. So Gretchen's going to pull up a poll here on the screen, and we want to know, where should the constitutional amendment brochures and bond flyers be distributed? So go ahead and feel free to answer this question on your screen, whether it's at the check-in table, in line, at the voting booths, at the ballot table, or at the chief's table. As a reminder, these brochures and flyers explain the amendment and bond issues in plain English. So we want to make sure voters see them before they vote. Gretchen, how's the results coming in? It looks like almost everyone's getting this right, which is fantastic.
If you guys are knocking out of the park.
All right, I think almost everyone has answered. I'm very happy to see almost everyone got this right, that the correct answer is to distribute these in line while voters are in line. So this is something that your greeter should be doing, to offer the brochures and flyers to voters who are in line so they can take a look at them before they are checked in to vote. You can also have some at the check table if you want, but we encourage you to do this while they're in line, especially in case you have longer lines. It's a perfect thing for voters to be looking at while they're waiting to be checked in. All right, with that, let me turn over to Gretchen to take you through important reminders before Election Day.
Thanks, Ravi. So we have a number of different things that we ask of you before Election Day to make sure that you and all of the election officers in your precinct are prepared and ready to go. And first and foremost, I'm sure that you all are well aware of this at this point, is that we email you and call you a lot. We have a lot of information to share and a lot of things that we want to do to make sure that you're prepared. And so we don't want you to miss any of that information. So always be on the lookout for emails from election officers at fairfaxcounty.gov or phone calls from the number on the screen. And it helps to add us to your contacts. So if you add us in your inbox and on your phone, then you won't miss any of those messages. But again, please be on the lookout for calls and emails from us and respond promptly so we know that you've received the message. So the emails are the first place to check to find information from us. The second go-to place is the election officer portal. So this is your one-stop shop for all the information you need to know about your precinct, the election officers, your assignment, everything like that. So if you have a question, go to the portal first. Something that I really love, a feature that we have for chiefs in particular, is this pre-election checklist we have in the portal. So we know we have a couple of different tasks we ask of you with different deadlines for each one. And so we have an easy place to keep track of it all. But even better, it's interactive. So after you finish one of these tasks, you can go ahead and check it off. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, there's a way to update those tasks. And you get that satisfying green check mark to say that you're on the right track. So you can use the links to find the relevant information and then check off the tasks once you've completed them, all in the election officer portal. Okay, so thinking ahead on some of those tasks, we have a number of tasks that are due this upcoming Friday, the 25th. The first one is to contact your polling place. It's really important that you do this as soon as possible. So if there's anything you need to coordinate that takes time, such as making sure that you have enough tables and chairs for your precinct, that they have enough time to get those to you for Election Day. So contact them as soon as you can. In the election officer portal and in the Chief's notebook, we have a list of the types of questions and things to confirm with the facility staff ahead of time. So take a look at that and make sure that you relay all the important information. One of those things to figure out with your polling place is your site setup time for the day before Election Day, Monday, November 4th. So you'll coordinate with them to figure out a time that works to go ahead and set up your voting room ahead of time. And along with that, you're going to need to coordinate the supply pickup time. So we have 4 different depots across the county to pick up some of those pre-election supplies. And so you'll go select your select supply pickup time, and then the corresponding time you'll drive those materials over to the polling place for site setup. And so by this Friday, we need you to let us know what location to do the supply pickup and what times you're going to do those on Monday, November 4th. All of that can be accomplished in the election officer portal. Third is to contact officers on your roster. They are very excited to be hearing from their chief. They've got a lot of questions about things going on in their polling place, the other officers in their precinct, things like that. And so we have a template in the chief's notebook for suggested things to say during that first outreach. And so the template we provide is for email, which is a good way to record all that information. But don't just stop at email, because sometimes emails get filtered out, they go to junk. And so we want to make sure that you get in contact with the officers. So try email, but try phone calls, texts, anything you can do to get a hold of them. After you try all three of those things, if you're still having trouble reaching your officers, reach out to us and we can do what we can to get you in contact. So our fourth major task for this Friday is to complete this briefing. So you all are well on your way for that one. So it's a two-part process. One is watching the briefing, but we're also going to send out an attendance quiz after this briefing to make sure you complete that to get full credit. Those are the four things you need to do for this Friday. If you're looking for some additional practice, these are optional tasks, but a good way to make sure that you get ready for Election Day. We still have a number of upcoming opportunities. So we have the Chief Open House later this week, so tomorrow and Thursday. And this is my favorite event of the election season. It's really nice to meet you all in person and give you a chance to get some really great hands-on practice. And so for those of you who have attended the open house in the past, we may have some new stations for you this time as well. You can sign up for an entry time in the election officer portal too. Another popular feature of this open house is where you can pick up the paper copy of your Chief's notebook ahead of time. So if you want to be able to flip through the pages and mark things up ahead of time, come to the Chief's notebook so you can pick up your notebook there. If you're looking for some more structured training before Election Day, we still have a number of chief workshops that you can take as well. So this would be more step-by-step guidance and making sure that you feel extra prepared for anything that might come up. So we have two different workshops for you. The first are the chief workshops, which is the general overview of chief responsibilities. And then the closing procedures workshop that Ravi mentioned earlier with a specific focus on closing procedures. And the interactive, you can kind of think through the different tasks you have to do during the closing process. We have a number of options still available for each of those workshops, and you can sign up for those in the election officer portal as well. Okay, so you've done all of your pre-election tasks, you've gotten that extra training, you've read through the Chief's notebook. Now it's time for the Monday, day before Election Day setup. So this is a two-part process. First, you go to a depot location. So there are 4 different locations across the county where you can go find a spot convenient to you to pick up your supplies. And again, you'll select those ahead of time in the election officer portal. And so you'll go to the depot to pick up your black kit and your poll pads. And then you go straight directly from the depot to your polling place to do that site setup with the officers in your precinct. I want to stress how important it is that you go directly from the depot to the site setup. You have really important materials and we want to make sure that they stay secure the whole time. And then if you're in a school, your site setup time is prearranged. We've worked it out with them that you have a window between 3:30 and 7:30 p.m. For polling places that are not at a school, it's likely similar hours, but you can check these specific ones with the facility staff. And just a few things to keep in mind for that Monday site setup. We have a number of one-page guides for you. If you're not sure exactly what you should do on Monday versus on Tuesday, follow these handout guides and you'll get all the information you need. You can pass these out to your officers and start that delegation early. Another thing to keep in mind for the Monday setup is this is your chance to make sure that your voting room is completely accessible for any voters with disabilities. So this is a number of things to keep in mind in terms of a clear path of travel from the parking lot to the building and also from the building to your particular voting room, making sure that there is adequate space everywhere, adequate signage so everyone knows where to go. We have another checklist for you to make sure that your path of travel in your voting room is accessible. And again, the Monday setup is the best chance to do that. So I'm going to go ahead with another knowledge check to make sure that you all know what needs to be done for this Friday. I'm going to launch a poll. And so the question is, which of the pre-election tasks must chiefs complete by this Friday, October 25th? Assistant chiefs don't have quite as many pre-election responsibilities, but one of these on there in particular is still something that we are expecting of the assistant chiefs by this Friday. So as the polls are coming in, it looks like you all have been paying attention, which I greatly appreciate. So I'm going to give you just a few more seconds to get going on that.
Gretchen, I don't know if our chiefs and assistant chiefs have noticed, but we've also tried really hard this year to provide a lot of information and materials earlier than we have in past years. Our briefing is a little bit earlier than before. You received your roster and other chief information a week earlier than you used to. So hopefully we're giving you more time to do these things as well. How's it looking on the answers, Gretchen?
I think we're just about set, so I'll go and close the poll and share the results to you all. And yes, you guys also knocked this one out of the park. There are 4 things that we need for you to do by this Friday. So contact your polling place, select your supply pickup and site setup times in the election officer portal, contact your officers, and complete the attendance quiz for watching this briefing. The others, the open house, the trainings are optional, still strongly encouraged. But those first 4 things we need you to do by this Friday. If you run into any issues or have questions, our team is just a phone call away, and we're happy to walk you through any of these if you're having any trouble.
I have to say, Gretchen, I love that many folks want to attend the open house and create their election day plan this early. That's terrific.
Definitely encouraged for that as well. Great. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ravi, who's going to talk a little bit more about opening the polls.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen. Let's jump right into it. It's election morning. It's 5 a.m. What do you need to keep in mind? So first, when it comes to your voting equipment, as has been our policy for the last few elections, we want you to open and set up 2 DS200s. So that's both DS200 scanners that you've received. You would open them both up and get them fully operational before voting opens. So that way, during the day, if for any reason one is not working, the other one is immediately ready to go. This is a presidential election. It's our big one. Make sure they're both ready. When it comes to the express vote, you want to make sure you set up one of them, and then you are ready to open up the other one if you need to. But again, set up 2 DS200s and then set up at least 1 express vote. You can set up both if you'd like. All right, here's a really important one. What are the different phone numbers that you might be using before the polls open and during election day? There are 3 main numbers that we provide to you in the Chief's notebook that you may need to call us for. First, we have our general support phone number. If you call general support, that's where you get folks like me and Gretchen and Sean to help with just general questions, and all of our staff. Just any type of policy or procedural question, anything you're not sure about, feel free to call us at general support. And in particular, your election officers who should have arrived by 5 a.m., if they have not arrived by 5:30, give us a call, because we do have a very large stable of reserve officers, and we'll send out replacements to you. The next is our tech and emergency support phone number. So this used to be in your notebook as technical support. It's now renamed to tech and emergency support. And this is for any type of situation that is considered an emergency or is out of the routine. So if you are dealing with a significant emergency of any kind, call this number. And of course, as the situation dictates, you may need to call 911 directly. But if it's something that you require support from our office for, call the tech and emergency support number. We're fortunate to have a police liaison in our incident command center with us, and they're going to help us handle all the issues that may occur outside of the 40-foot area. So different situations that may require to call the tech and emergency support number are, for example, if your polling place is not open at 5 a.m. for you to be able to get in to do your setup, call tech and emergency support. If an election officer or voter is experiencing a medical emergency, call tech and emergency support. If there's some type of incident occurring, if there's a fight breaking out amongst voters or other individuals, whether that's inside the polling place, within the prohibited area, outside the 40 feet, call tech and emergency support. Any type of emergency situation, if your voting equipment isn't working, to us, that's an emergency. We want to make sure you have working equipment, call tech and emergency support. And in our incident command center, we will have a number of staff who are briefed and prepared and ready to handle all the different types of situations that may arise, especially whether that's something we as office staff or rovers may help you with, if it's inside your polling place or within the 40 feet, or if it's something that we will work with our public safety partners and the police on, if it's something outside the 40 feet. So again, those are the different situations for which you would call tech emergency support before polls open or during the day. And of course, we have an excellent voter services team. And so that's our voter support line. If you have a question about a specific voter situation, if for a particular voter, they're not sure if they qualify for a provisional ballot or not, or there's some type of moving condition about the specific voter, and we think we need to look it up in the voter registration database. That's when you would call the voter support line. And all this is covered on the inside cover of the Chief's notebook. All right, so let's jump into some things to be aware of during the day. First, as always, we are asking you to complete turnout surveys throughout the day to help us know how many voters you've processed so far and how many provisional voters there are. In this election, there is a fourth turnout survey at 5 p.m. So we have the ones at 9 a.m., 12 p.m., and 3 p.m. as usual, and then an additional one at 5 p.m. And as a reminder, any election officer or high school page may complete the turnout surveys. So you can assign that task to anyone who's working in your precinct. Now, sometimes you have situations where a voter leaves a ballot in the voting room. How do you handle that? Well, it depends. Sometimes you just have a voter who's in a hurry. They inserted their ballot into the DS200 and left without realizing that the DS200 kicked that ballot back for some reason. Maybe the voter overvoted that ballot, or maybe there were some unreadable marks on the ballot. In that case, if the voter attempted to scan the ballot in the DS200, you as an election officer can cast that ballot for the voter. The DS200 will ask you, do you want to do an override? And you can say, yes, go ahead and cast this ballot. And if it won't scan, then you can place an auxiliary compartment to be hand counted after polls close. The other situation is a fleeing voter. So this is someone who leaves a ballot anywhere else in the voting room. They didn't scan it on the DS200. Maybe they checked in to vote, saw their ballot, and weren't happy with the choices and decided to walk out. That's a fleeing voter, and it's an abandoned ballot. And in that case, you would void the ballot, and there are instructions in the Chief's notebook for what to do in that situation. In general, if you're experiencing issues on election day, don't wait to report them. Call us, let us know what's going on. In addition to that, we want you to document in the Chief's notes, but we want to be able to respond on election day if there's something going on that requires a response. And in addition, it's just helpful for us to know what's going on out in the field so we can make sure that other precincts, rovers and chiefs and other folks out in the field are aware and ready for anything that's happening. We have the incident report form on the admin tablet. So for those of you that worked in June, you may have seen the new form, and it's a little bit different this time. Last election, if you were experiencing any type of issue or needed more information, you could submit this form on the admin tablet. For this election, we want you to focus on incidents, something that requires a response from the office in terms of addressing a situation. Of course, your first priority is give us a call at Tech and Emergency Support if it's something that requires an immediate response. But if it's something to let us know, for example, maybe there was an altercation between voters outside or other individuals outside the polling place, document that using the incident report form on the admin tablet. So this would be anytime you use that incident report in the Chief's notes, it's still in the Chief's notes, there's still a paper form, but go ahead and also submit it through the form on the admin tablet so that we know about it immediately on election day. Gretchen, I can get the next slide, please. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about acceptable IDs. And the Virginia Department of Elections recently updated the list of acceptable IDs for use to vote in this election. There's one main change that it affects, and that's driver privilege cards. For those of you that have been around for a while, you may remember the driver privilege cards are something that were introduced by law a few years ago. These are a form of ID that are issued to individuals who are not US citizens. But there are two forms of ID that the DMV issues that are identical in appearance. Excuse me. So one is a limited duration license and the other is a driver privilege card. These two forms of ID are exactly identical in appearance, and there is absolutely no way for us to discern which one it is. However, one is an acceptable ID for voting and one is not. So how should you handle it if a voter presents an ID that could be one of these two IDs? Well, let's take a look at our procedures for that. So if a check-in officer scans an ID that looks like one of these IDs on the poll pad and it does not scan, then they would refer it to you as the chief or assistant chief. And what we're asking you to do in this election is to check for 3 criteria on that ID. On the top right, does it say federal limits apply? On the bottom of the front, does it have a number 9 under restrictions? And on the back, does it say limited duration? If an ID has all 3 of those criteria, then because we don't know which of the 2 IDs it is, we need you to ask the voter which ID it is, whether it is a limited duration driver's license or a driver privilege card. There's exact wording for how you should ask this question in the chief's notebook. If the voter says it is a driver's license, then we accept the ID. If the voter says it is a driver privilege card, then we have to ask the voter for another form of ID or to complete an ID confirmation statement. And if the voter does not know which of those 2 IDs it is, then we're going to err on the side of caution and ask the voter for another form of ID or to complete an ID confirmation statement. So again, let's recap briefly here. The Virginia Department of Elections updated the list of acceptable IDs for this election, and we want to make sure that you handle these 2 IDs in the way that they need to be handled per the law and per guidance from the Virginia Department of Elections. So you would review the ID if it's presented to you by a check-in officer to determine if it has these 3 criteria. And if it does, then we have to ask the voter which of the 2 IDs it is. And if they're not sure, again, we are on the side of asking them for a different form of ID. We've also got a lot of questions just in this election about non-citizens and who's eligible to vote. And we want to remind you that there's 2 parts to this process. One is when a voter registers to vote. That's when certain processes occur in accordance with laws set by the General Assembly. The other part is when a registered voter shows up at the polling place to check in to vote. That's your part of the process. If a voter is on the poll book and presents an acceptable form of ID, they are permitted to check in and vote. And if you have any questions or any issues on election day, give us a call. All right, let's talk about a few of the people that you might see in the polling place. First, as we mentioned, there are high school pages in this election. We love to have high school students who are excited about the civic process and want to serve on election day. As you can see on your screen, there are a number of different tasks high school pages can help with, including arranging the voting room, putting up signs, counting blank ballots when a new pack is opened, serving as a greeter to help welcome voters, ask them to have their ID ready and provide them the sample ballot. They can help with line control at the poll pads, the voting booths, and the DS200s. They can provide assistance to voters if requested. They can complete the voter count worksheet to compare the number of poll pad check-ins and number of DS200 ballots cast throughout the day. They can help distribute I voted stickers, and they can complete turnout surveys on the admin tablet. There's lots of things pages can do, and there's a handout in your notebook that goes over that. But there are a couple things that pages cannot do. One is that pages are not allowed to operate voting equipment. They can't check in voters or be the DS200 officer. They also may not issue ballots to voters. So once a ballot has been counted and set aside to be ready to be issued to a voter, that would then be an election officer duty. So again, that's very important. Pages can help with a lot of things, but they can't touch voting equipment during the day, and they can't issue ballots to voters. All right, next, authorized representatives, commonly known as poll watchers. Just like voters and you as election officers are part of the voting process, so are authorized representatives. They are an official, legal, and welcome part of the election process. Authorized representatives are individuals who represent a party or independent candidate on the ballot, and they have to submit an authorization form and be a registered Virginia voter. Authorized representatives are allowed to sit behind the check-in tables and see poll pad screens. They can also move around the voting room, but they're not allowed to impede the voting process or violate the secrecy of a voter's ballot. And if they have any questions or concerns, they should direct them to you as the chief or assistant chief, not your regular officers. Or they can escalate them to the party or candidate they represent, or they're welcome to contact us in the Office of Elections. Do review the authorized representative section of your chief's notebook for more information about authorized representatives, and feel free to call us if you have any questions or issues on election day. We do expect that almost every precinct will have authorized representatives in this election. We have a cordial relationship with the local political parties and their authorized representatives. We've never had any significant issues, but if you do encounter anything that you're not sure about, feel free to give us a call. You may also have news media who want to visit your precinct. News media generally let us know, and we would let you know if we expect them, but they may show up regardless, to any precinct, and they can visit any precinct for a reasonable and limited period of time. Media are allowed to conduct live interviews outside the prohibited area, so they should not be conducting live interviews inside the voting room or even within the prohibited area. Media should also not film or photograph anyone who specifically asks not to be filmed or photographed. And if they ask you any questions, you're welcome to provide facts, but not opinions. So for example, if they ask how many voters have voted so far today, you're welcome to check on the poll pads and let them know. If they ask you how many voters you think you'll have by the end of the day, well, that's an opinion and a forecast. Please don't provide that. Just stick to facts and figures. And again, either you can call the office or you can refer media to our office if you need any help. And there's more information in the notebook about this. Lastly, in a large presidential like this, one of the exciting things is we have international delegations and other visitors who are visiting precincts in this election. These groups and individuals would have an authorization letter from the office that they would show you. They typically visit designated precincts, and you can see some of them on the map on your screen. We've identified certain large precincts, often co-located precincts that we think would be helpful and interesting for them to visit. But there are some groups that we've already authorized to visit any precinct in the county. So everyone might see international delegation or other visitor. Just like media, they are not allowed to film or photograph anyone who asks not to be filmed or photographed. And as always, call the office if you need any help. All right, it's been a long voting day. Now we're into closing the polls. Jean, over to you.
Thank you, Ravi, and sorry for that slight delay. I'm trying to juggle too many things, just like all of you are on election day. The first thing is take a breath, get a drink of water, gather your thoughts. This is the most important part of the day, and we want you to be on your game so that you can manage this process smoothly and evenly for the rest of the day. The first thing you'll want to do is make sure you have handed out the closing guides to your election officers sometime maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock. Give them a chance to be familiar with the tasks they're going to be performing at closing. You are going to have your own checklist that you're going to use to monitor the process so that you can trust but verify in your delegation of these various tasks. You'll want to make sure that all the voters have voted and left the voting room before you start the closing procedures. If you've got voters in line at 7 o'clock, please send 2 officers of different parties out to the end of the line. And if they can handle any voters who may show up after 7 p.m. and politely inform them that the polls are closed. The closing numbers worksheet is now an integral part of the process. Various tasks of closing will require officers to record numbers on this worksheet. Then the chief or assistant chief is going to use this to fill out the statement of results. If they hand you a closing numbers worksheet that does not have all the numbers filled in, please hand it back and ask them to finish that job for you because you need all these numbers filled in to proceed. One of the other things you need for the statement of results is the ballot status accounting report. That, along with that closing numbers worksheet, are the only 2 things you need to fill out your statement of results. The ballot status accounting report is very easy to find. It's at the top of each DS200 closing tape. And this is just a little visual reminder of how to find the number of total standard ballot sheets and total express vote cards. We've circled that in red there so you can see where on the tape to find that piece of information. You're going to have, you will have used both your DS200s during the day. Look at the one that has the highest public counter, the one that has the most votes on it for the day. Close that one first, but make sure you're doing these scanners one at a time. If something should go wrong, shutting down that first scanner, you would have to rescan all the ballots in the other scanner. And if you've already closed it, then you don't have that backup, so to speak. So take your time, go one at a time, and then things will go more smoothly for you. It seems that every election there is one precinct that pulls the USB flash drives out of the scanner before it has completely shut down. Please don't do that. It's just like your computer. If you pull out a hard drive or a USB stick while the computer is on, you can crash the drive. So please just wait till the machine is completely shut down. And if any issues do occur during the closing of a scanner, call tech and emergency support. Don't guess what you should do because the procedure might vary depending on the situation. Let them walk you through the procedure that would work for you. The flash drives have two colors, and we have color coded them based on where they go. The white flash drives are going to go in your number 7 envelope, which will go to the courthouse after the election. The purple flash drives are the ones that the collector officers are itching to get their hands on. Have them wait until everything's done. You will put the purple ones in the purple pouch. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Just make sure that you've got 2 of each and that they have been placed in the correct color-coded destination. I was a chief or assistant chief for 15 elections, and I only had 1 hand-counted ballot ever. It almost never happens because most ballots can be rescanned if you flip them over, reverse them, or have the voter spoil their ballot and get a new one. But in that rare event that it happens, you will have a guide to hand counting ballots. This is in the side pocket of your black kit. And there's a lot of wonderful examples here to help you determine the voter's intent. However, if you have any question, even the slightest shadow of a doubt as to what you should do with a particular ballot or how to handle it, call us. We have people here who will help you walk through that process. Collector officers are kind of a balancing act between speed and accuracy. Accuracy is the most important one. It is not that we want them out the door at 7:30. We want them out the door when they have everything that they should have. So that means they need a trip lock bag with the form filled out inside and any ballots from your drop box. By the way, in a co-located precinct, there should be 2 trip lock bags coming back. If there's a shared drop box, one of those bags will be empty and it will say 0 ballots. So we always want to get back 2 trip lock bags in co-located precincts. There will also be a purple pouch. Again, in co-located, there will be 2 purple pouches. Everybody has their own pouch. There will be multiple envelopes 1A, at least 4. Could be up to 8. It just depends on the precinct. We have given extra envelopes to precincts where we expect a lot of provisional or same-day registrations. All right. Now you've shut down your scanners. Your collector officers are on their way. It's time to start packing the ballots that have been used and voted. The voted ballots go in special flat packed boxes from your cage that have RFID tags. They have a small white barcode on them that helps us track chain of custody and inventory. Your voted ballots go in these special brown boxes. You'll see that on the left there, there's the number 3 box. Your blank ballots are going to also be in brown boxes, but for this, reuse the boxes that your ballots came packed in. So just to reiterate that, of voted ballots, number 3, this is the special boxes that you will assemble with the RFID tag. Blank ballots, you're going to go in the reusing of the ballots, of the boxes your ballots were delivered in. The statement of results is fairly similar, but 2 big improvements. One is Ravi has already talked about your SOR helper app on the admin tablet. This helps you make sure that your numbers are good before you copy them down onto the SOR. If you get stuck on the SOR at any time, please call us. We don't want somebody sitting there, spending a half an hour gnashing their teeth and pulling out their hair because they can't figure out why things don't work. Give us a call. We'll help you solve the problem. And take a look at that form before you put it in envelope number 2. This should not be blank. There shouldn't be any blank boxes, and it should have signatures. You would be surprised sometimes at how people leave things off of SORs, and we want you to complete this as accurately as you can. So that's why we've got the SOR helper. One new thing for this election is we're making it easier for you to do something you've already been doing, which is to account for how did you use all the ballots that were delivered to you in the cage. The back of the SOR says maybe you got 2,000 ballots. You used 1,500 ballots for voting, and you've got 500 blank ballots left at the end of the day. So 2,000 should equal 2,000. This question asks you to look at sections 5 and section 6 and say, do they match? Because maybe somebody wrote down the number of packs of ballots instead of multiplying that by 200. This will help you catch some of the really common errors like that by taking a look at 5 and 6 and saying, do they match? Envelope number 7 was redesigned in the June election to make it super easy to fill out. Remember, envelope number 7 is where you're going to put the 2 USB flash drives that have white labels that actually say number 7 on them. Number 7 also contains trip lock bag seal, cut zip tie seals, and the red seals from the DS200 printer compartments. All you need to do is look at the DS200 section of the machine certification form. Your officers have filled this out when they were closing the scanners, and copy those literally from the machine cert form over to envelope 7. We laid it out so that it looks exactly the same. No missing signatures is an enormous goal that we would like to reach. We don't want anybody to have to come back after the election to sign a form that should have been signed on election day. So there's several signatures that have to be done throughout the day, and particularly at closing. We prefer that the chief sign position 1, the assistant chief sign in position 2. Your collector officers would be 3 and 4, and then everyone else after that. Election officers should always sign the same number on every form. So if they signed in position 6 on the oath, we'd like to see them in position 6 on the SOR, on box number 3, etc. Before you finish packing up, have an officer use this Verify Signatures guide to go through and make sure that everything has been signed. That way, we don't have to call anyone and ask them to come back to the office after the election. And just a reminder, nobody should be pre-signing any sort of form or label during the day. Little shout out to our incredibly hardworking folks at the warehouse. These people spend hours, days, weeks packing these cages and unpacking them after the election. And take a look at where that red arrow is pointing. There are number of wire frames sticking out of that cage that are incredibly dangerous to the people who load these carts back up into the trucks and then unload them back at the warehouse. Wireframes stay on the signs, please, to avoid this. And in a gray cage, you can see in the right-hand side there with the green arrow that those signs are packed on the side, not on top, but on the side, and the wireframes are pointing up. So this is safe for everyone. And the order in which you pack your cage really does matter a tremendous amount to the people at the warehouse. It helps them break down the cages faster and inventory all the supplies much more efficiently. So please make sure that your officers are following the packing the cage guide versus just, well, it looks like it will fit here. Another thing that happens is the slide bolts do not get engaged. Most everyone is doing the padlock at the top and the bottom of the doors, but it can be a little hard to engage this, what's called the slide bolt. There's one at the top and one at the bottom. There's a little knob that sticks out. You get your finger on that, slide it so that it can then move up or down. It moves up for the top and it goes down for the bottom. After those bolts are engaged, then put your padlocks on and seal your cage. Last thing is all of the election officers should help the chief load their car. There should be 5 items here: your black kit, your poll pads, your number 3 voted ballots in number 3 boxes, your number 6 blank ballots in number 6 boxes, and don't forget the chief's supply return form. This does need to be signed. It will be presented when you go to the depot. It's a chain of custody document. And we really do want you to call or text your rover when you are leaving the polling place. They can't go home until they've heard from you. So let's help them have a shorter night, just as we're doing our best to have you have a shorter night as well. And now we'll go to Sean for some discussion about non-routine voters.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks for bearing with us here. We've walked all the way through Election Day, opening the precinct during the day, and reminders for closing. We're going to circle back here to non-routine voters and then get into some same-day and provisional considerations. But first, let's clarify, let's define what is a non-routine voter. Let's compare by contrast. What's a routine voter? A routine voter is any voter that your check-in officers can check in normally. They have their ID, they present their acceptable ID, give their name and address, and they get checked in and they're on their way. And that's most voters. What a non-routine voter is anyone for whom that doesn't apply. So perhaps they have a special status in the poll pad pertaining to their absentee ballot, or they've moved. Maybe they're one of those federal only voters that Robbie mentioned earlier. Maybe they don't have their ID, they're going to need assistance. Anyone that your election officer is going to call for the chief for help for, that's going to be a non-routine voter. And so we won't go into all of those situations right here now because this is a briefing, but I want to tell you about where all those resources are that can help you with those situations. So we have a list in the Chief's Notebook, which is available online, or you can pick up starting at our open house tomorrow, that goes over some of the common non-routine situations and the steps that you would take. And we also have a list of all of those poll pad prompts. There's about 10 or 20 of them that detail a lot of different circumstances that a voter could be in, but they list out exactly why that voter is having a special prompt on the poll pad and what steps you would take to help them. We've also got, as we've been mentioning, we're always available by phone, and this is no exception. If you need help with non-routine voters, you can call us and we'll look up anything about the voter we need to, or walk you through any process that you're unclear on. We'll also talk about the voter referral worksheet, which is a worksheet for some non-routine voters that has a condensed list of steps to take. And then finally, the what ifs in your notebook are a comprehensive list of 23 different situations that go fully into detail about all the steps to take. That's the place to refer to when you really want to get your head around the process. You have all these resources and tools available for you to work through these non-routine voters. If we take a look at the poll pad prompts, I'm going to zoom in on one of these here. You can see that it tells you exactly what to do, like I mentioned. So for the chief officer, if you can see at the bottom of the screen, the voter has already voted. So this would be a voter who has already returned their absentee ballot. And let's say they forgot, they show up in your precinct. Well, it tells you that. It tells you the voter has returned their voted ballot and they can only vote a provisional ballot. It says that's reason number 5. So you know which provisional reason code to use. It tells you which section of the voter referral worksheet you're going to be using, and that's section A. And it tells you where more information is. That's what if number 20C in your notebook, and then also tells you to give us a call if you need more info. So everything I just mentioned, it's all sort of on that screen for the voters for whom that applies. So we really want to give you as much information as we can to help you work through these situations so that you don't feel unprepared. Having mentioned all that, let's talk about some of the most common non-routine situations that we'd expect you to see on election day. That would be for these two here, a voter who has moved, or maybe they're not registered at all. They're not on the poll pad. They've never registered to vote, or they've moved into your precinct. That would be a same-day registration. And I'm going to go into detail on that in just a few minutes here, but we expect a good amount of those. Secondly, if a voter brings in their absentee ballot, they've requested it, it's been issued to them, and they have it in their hand, but they prefer to vote in person in the precinct. That one's pretty easy. That's the absentee surrender process. They hand that in, and they get to vote normally on the machine. They just have to surrender the absentee ballot, and instructions for that are in your what ifs as well, and what if number 19. So those are two really common ones. One's going to be a provisional situation, one's not a provisional situation. So if you had to guess what you're going to be doing all day, I'd say those two are going to be pretty high on the list. We'll go into a couple more non-routine situations here. Like I said, we won't go into all of them, but some that I want to call out here. The affirmation of eligibility is a form that comes up a good amount. This is used for a couple of different things, so I'm going to take a brief moment to explain it here. For a voter who is inactive, listed as inactive on the poll pad or marked for address confirmation, this essentially means that we've sent them mail and it's come back undeliverable. So maybe they might have moved. If they've moved, you'll work through the what ifs and the moving conditions to see what their options are. And I'll go into a bit more detail, explicate on that in just a moment. But if they haven't moved, let's say they still live at that same address, they're just marked as inactive, then the poll pad prompt will tell you what to do with this form. Essentially, it's section A for you, the election officer, and section B on the backside, the voter makes an affirmation. Now, this same form is used if a voter is ever challenged by someone else. Someone can challenge a voter if they believe that they're not eligible to vote. And so that's also on the front side of this form. So this form has two uses. I'm calling that out here, that there's two different use cases for this form. Just don't get confused about that. In any case, though, if this form is being used for either of those circumstances, it's not a provisional ballot, right? The voter is voting normally on the DS200 after filling out this form. So if ever a voter needs to fill out this form, and there are reasons that explain this in the what ifs, it's not a provisional ballot. Going more into what resources you have, we have a non-routine chapter of the notebook, a provisional chapter of the notebook, and we have a problem-solving chapter of the notebook. These are for situations that could use a bit more explanation, or you'll want an explanation for how to work through something. So things like de-escalating a difficult or a tense situation with a voter or another individual in your precinct, in your polling place. As Robbie talked about, we did a de-escalation webinar. There's some resources here in the notebook, or just other how-tos. So how to edit or cancel a check-in, say you missed that they needed assistance or they voted curbside, how to handle spoiled ballots, voided ballots, if a voter overvoted their ballot. Things like that is all here in this problem-solving chapter 10 of your notebook. So having talked about a couple of non-routine situations, let's dive into a big portion of those, which is provisionals and same-day registrations. So starting off, backing up for a second, what is a provisional ballot? I just want to make sure I can say this here while everyone's listening. It's for a voter whose eligibility can't be determined at that exact moment, and it doesn't go in the DS200. It instead goes into its own envelope, which is returned to the Office of Elections and adjudicated by the Electoral Board right after the election, before the final results. And the Electoral Board will follow applicable Virginia law to determine whether or not they can count that ballot. Commonly, there's a couple of situations. There's if a voter is marked as having already voted, let's say maybe they forgot, or their son has the same name or something like that. They live at the same address. Or if they've returned, they don't have their absentee ballot with them. Or the most common one, same-day registration, which I just mentioned. We'll go into detail about that here now. It is for any person who is otherwise qualified to register to vote. They can complete an SDR in the precinct where they currently live. And that's the point I want to stress here, is that SDR, same-day registration, happens in your precinct. If you're going to be issuing an SDR to a voter, you're going to want to make sure and verify that based on their address, they live in your precinct. And so you'll have that admin tablet. One goes to your provisional specialist and one goes to you. And you'll be able to use the My Neighborhood app on the admin tablet to look up the voter's address, confirm that that is your precinct, and that they're eligible to proceed with the SDR process in your precinct. So if they're not registered, or if they've moved into your precinct, those would be good candidates for an SDR. We'll talk a little bit about the exact process for that, but I'll call out a couple of details here. It's important to make sure that the correct side, or the appropriate side of the provisional envelope, is completed for these same-day registration voters, or any provisional voter. There's two sides to one envelope. So one side is for SDR, and you can see it's there's there's text at the top. There's a block there that says SDR. And there's only one option in the bottom left, number 1, same day registration, not on poll book. On the other side, though, that's for all other provisional reasons, some of the ones that I just talked about a minute ago. So voters only ever filling out one of these two sides. And when you communicate this to your provisional specialist who's going to work with the voter on the envelope, you'll mark the reason, and that'll let them know which side that they're filling out. We talked a little bit earlier about the provisional overlays that the provisional specialist will have. As you can see here, these envelopes are kind of dense. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that we don't necessarily need to focus on, optional things that aren't material omissions or wouldn't be material omissions for the application or the envelope itself. So if we drop the overlay on top, these your provisional specialists will have these. It includes all of that optional info, which is still fine if the voter fills those out, but we want to make sure that we can focus on the parts of the envelope that have to get filled out, those with an asterisk. When they're not there, it's kind of hard to tell at a glance which one has an asterisk. And so we're hoping that these will help out when you're beleaguered 15 hours into your day, 10 hours into your day, and you are still going with provisional voters. This is just a way to kind of at a glance check that the voter has completed all of the required sections. And if the provisional specialist ever sees that something is amiss, they'll still have to use their eyes. They'll have to remove the overlay, take a look at the envelope, and see if the voter missed filling out a section or if they need to provide any more clarification before proceeding. So I want to point out one thing on this screen here, though. You can see in the top of the SDR on the left there, it says party ballot, and it's got a check mark for dual party primaries. This is a general election. It's a presidential election. It's not a dual party primary. So one of the first steps that the provisional specialist is going to do before they hand the envelope over to the voter is strike through that section and write the precinct before they give it to the voter. We don't want the voter to think that section is for them or give us any indication of how they perhaps intend to vote. So in a general election, we strike through that and then proceed. Couple more reminders here. A common mistake. We've said this before, we'll say it again. One of the most common mistakes we see on provisional envelopes from voters is that they miss filling in question number 3 on the SDR side of the provisional envelope. And that's the question about felony or adjudication of mental incapacitation. Have you been convicted of felony and disqualified to vote? And if yes, has your right to vote been restored? Oftentimes this is blanked or blank, or it's 4 checkboxes. So people will answer a different variety of checkboxes. And they want to answer it for whatever the situation is. The overlay reveals one of those checkboxes because it's the most common one. But either way, the voter has to answer the first line that you see there. And if they answer yes on the first line, yes, I've been disqualified to vote, they must answer the second line. Has it been restored? Yes or no. We're hoping that the provisional envelope being slightly reconfigured will mean that fewer voters will miss answering this question. But either way, it's still one of the perhaps more easy to miss sections of the provisional envelope. So that's a big thing to watch out for the provisional specialists. Another common mistake we see, this is on the side of the election officer, I'll flip it on over there, is a lot of, well, so reason code number 6 for a provisional ballot is rare. Reason code 6 is other, and then there's a line to write something. And what we see is that the majority of the reason code 6s that we have come back could have been something else. It could have been a same-day registration. They'll say other, the voter moved. Well, that would have been an SDR in your precinct. Or we see other, the voter didn't have their ballot to surrender. And you can see right there up on that list, well, that's vote by mail, no ballot to surrender. And so you as the chief or assistant chief is going to be determining the reason a voter is voting provisionally and marking that, which we'll talk about in a moment here. But because reason code 6 is so rare, and because it often could be something else, the voter referral worksheet and the provisional log now have reminders to give us a call in case there's any clarification we could provide, anything we can look up for that voter, or anything like that to help. And it also has a place to affirm, let's say there's a situation where a voter knows they're not in the right precinct. They've been given the information about where the right place would be for them to do an SDR, but they insist on voting there. You can let us know about that as well. You can give us more information about these situations, because if it should be an SDR, we'd want it to be an SDR in your precincts. So just know that these are quite rare, and there's a bit more explanation in those places for that. And then finally, a couple more quick, or another quick reminder, the provisional envelope, the provisional ballot envelope goes into the appropriate number 1A envelope. So you'll have one for SDR, one for non-SDR. In fact, you'll have two, probably. You'll have enough to, we'll give you enough envelopes, because if you have a high turnout of provisional voting, want to make sure they fit in the envelope. So just make sure the provisional specialist is storing those in the right location. So I've talked a little bit about the provisional specialist and about you as the chief or assistant chief. Let's go into detail on that division of responsibilities. So this is what we have done before in June, and same thing here in November, not a change here, but I want to mention it. The chief and assistant chief is the decision maker. So they'll be determining the voter's eligibility based on what the voter has said their situation is, working through that situation with the voter, using all those resources that I talked about earlier, and determining what option we're going to be giving to that voter, whether that be an SDR, whether that be a provisional for some other reason, whether that voter, say, needs to go to a different precinct because they're totally in the wrong location. The chief or assistant chief works through that with the voter to arrive at what their option is going to be. If that is going to be a provisional ballot, they will make that mark on the voter referral worksheet, which is my next section here, but they'll pass that over to the provisional specialist, who, once that decision has been made, they help the voter with largely the administrative portion of that process. So there's a lot that has to happen after that. The voter has to fill out their envelope, complete their ballot, seal it in the ballot, has to get logged in the provisional log, has to get checked. The provisional specialist has their own area to go through that whole procedure with the voter after you, as the chief or assistant chief, has made the decision and teed it off over to them. So that's sort of the division of responsibility between the two of them. And to effectuate that in your precinct, you would have the provisional specialist sit next to you or near you at the chief or assistant chief's at the chief's table. Right there, you can have both of them nearby. And you can, as you can see on the diagram here, that's pretty far away from the DS200s, because a provisional voter is not voting on the DS200, they're voting a provisional ballot. So having the provisional specialist right near your chief's table will work out well, because you have to work closely to get the provisional, to get the voter over to the provisional table to continue with the process. One thing I'll mention is that because this is a presidential election, in a presidential election, we might have lines, and the line for provisional voting might also be something that exists. So just something to consider in terms of your spacing. You don't want to overburden or overtax what the provisional specialists are doing and have them juggling too many things at once. You may want to devote a little bit more space for people to wait as they're waiting to be next in the process. Having talked about the division of responsibilities, we'll go into detail on the form that Ravi mentioned, the voter referral worksheet, which we've slightly updated from June, which was updated in June. And that outlines the workflow for the most common situations that are going to be becoming a provisional ballot. A lot of the ones I just talked about. And for any of those, it's going to be required, because there's that checklist on the back that the provisional specialist is going to need to walk through the process with the voter. As Ravi mentioned, in June, if you served with us in June, the voter referral worksheet was at the check-in table. And now it starts with the chief or assistant chief. And I'll go into detail in that in a minute, because now I'm going to walk you through the voter referral worksheet in each section. So we'll go into detail here. It's important, and we want to make sure that you understand what this worksheet is, because it looks kind of dense. But when we go in depth on each of these 4 or 5 sections, it's actually not too much that it's requiring of you. And what it truly is a worksheet to work through these situations. It sort of condenses the workflow that we mentioned that's in the what ifs, it's in the poll pad prompts, it's available by phone with us or in your notebook. It puts it into a checklist for you and asks that of you, and also asks of you the information that you would need to write down either way. So something we notice for our very successful chiefs is that they'll give us a lot of good ideas. We'll find, say, scraps of paper that come back in the black kit where there's a chart or a grid of saying the voter moved and here were their addresses. What this does is sort of incorporates and encapsulates that sort of information that you need to record to work through moving conditions either way. So talking about the flow of who completes the voter referral worksheet, as I just mentioned, the first half and the first part of the second half are done by the chief or assistant chief. In June, if you recall, we suggested that it starts at the voter check-in table. And what we saw from our feedback and in practice was that a lot of chiefs and assistant chiefs preferred to just take over and do it themselves. It will slow down, or they noticed that it was slowing down the check-in process for the election officer at the check-in table to write down the voter's information, determine, and then call the chief over. It was quicker to triage over to the chief, especially since we know that the chief is going to have to look up the voter on their own poll pad anyway. So it makes sense to start with the chief. And so we've changed that to match the feedback that we got. Additionally, because election officers are trained to, by and large, call over their chief if they ever run into something they don't know how to deal with, the chief or assistant chief is the one who's better prepared to work through which of these situations actually applies for the voter. So you'll work through the front half and the top half, the top section of the back half to see what's the voter situation, what am I going to be doing for this voter, and if it's going to be a provisional, which provisional is that before you give it, which provisional reason code is that before you give it to the provisional specialist. And so we're going to zoom in, or sorry, we're going to mention that on the back half, this worksheet becomes that checklist so that each voter has a checklist and we can affirm that they've gone through all of the sections, or the provisional specialist is the one doing this. I'll call out just a couple of important things on that checklist. One of the steps is that someone else should be double checking and verifying that 2 sets of eyes have been laid on the provisional envelope that the voter has filled out, so that we're confident that the voter's not made any omissions before it comes back to our office, because we want to make sure that they've got the best chance for their ballot to be counted if they're a qualified voter. So another set of eyes as a sanity check to make sure that nothing's missing. And that can be with the provisional overlay, either the SDR or the non-SDR, depending on which side of the envelope it is. And that could be any officer in the precinct, either the chief, the assistant chief, or any other officer. In fact, since you have 2 provisional specialists, it might make the most sense for them to be the double check for each other. And so having mentioned that, we'll go into what A, B, C, and D are. And again, it's important to know what this worksheet is because we're asking that it be used. So you can see those are those situations. Voters got an absentee status. They're not on the poll pad. They've moved, or they're marked as already voted, or you're just unsure. And as you may be able to pick up on, A, B, C, and D have a good chance that they're going to be a provisional, depending on what you work through with the voter. So we'll talk about them a bit in detail. Section A, again, that's just if a voter has an absentee status. And that can go in a couple different ways. And you'll have more information. You can see it says there that what if number 19 has more information for what to do if you want to refer to that for more information. So if a voter shows as issued, the question is, did they bring their ballot with them? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then that's the absentee surrender process I talked about earlier that we would anticipate would be pretty common, because it always tends to be pretty common. The detailed instructions of that are in your what ifs. And because it's so common, we saw that what we got back in June was a lot of absentee surrenders. It's just one single checkbox, and there's no reason to continue with a provisional. So this worksheet wouldn't be required for additional subsequent absentee surrendered voters to continue with. But if the answer is no to whether or not they brought their ballot, well, that's going to be a provisional. You can see it tells you which reason code, which reason number you're going to be using for that provisional envelope to go onto the backside. Or if it's any of those other absentee statuses, it tells you the same thing there as well. So it's just a quick way to work through that. But again, you have in your what ifs, it's going to take you to the same answer, just with more words to work through. Section B is where we start to get into address things. So if the voter is not on the poll pad in any precinct, or they need to do a same-day registration, those are basically the same thing. It's just 2 ways of describing the same situation. If they are in your precinct, that's the first thing you're going to verify. You're going to try to find them just in case your check-in table wasn't able to find them. And if you don't find them, they're not registered, use the My Neighborhood app on your admin tablet to look up their address, make sure they're in your precinct. You'll record that precinct number. And if that's your precinct, you're good to go with an SDR. If that's not your precinct number, that's where you'd let the voter know, hey, you're in the wrong place. And if you can't find them in My Neighborhood, give us a call. We have access to addresses that are outside of Fairfax County, and there are certain addresses in My Neighborhood, like military addresses that wouldn't be showing up there. But by and large, that should get you what the information you need for Section B. Section C is very similar, again, still with addresses. This is for when a voter has moved. This can get kind of tricky. So these are the moving conditions that I've been talking about, and they're in detail in your what ifs. They're what ifs number 5, 6, 7, and 8. So they have several because they can get kind of complicated depending on where the voter has moved and when the voter has moved. So we need their old address and their new address. And then additionally, we need their congressional district and when they moved. We need all those pieces of information to determine what that voter's options are. And so this has you open up your what ifs and go to the moving conditions to determine, are they going to be voting an SDR in your precinct? Are they able to vote routinely in your precinct? Or are they voting somewhere else? So when I talk about moving conditions, we have a couple of condensed resources. The moving conditions grid here is in your notebook, and there's also a handout. And when I say vote routinely, I'm talking about the sections of here that aren't green where it says SDR. They'd have to fill something else out to update their address, or perhaps fill out the affirmation of eligibility, depending on where they fall on this chart. But this moving conditions chart lets you track where and when the voter moved to see what circumstance they end up in. And that's what we're referring to when we talk about moving conditions. And you can see in the chart, it also tells you which what if number 5, 6, 7, or 8 apply for where the voter is moved, and helps you determine when. We also have a flow chart as well. If the grid is not the easiest way for you to think through the problem or think through the situation, the flow chart gets you to the same answer with the same info for those of you who prefer to use this method. So again, these are available in the notebook and as a handout to work through these moving conditions, which is section C. But I'll reiterate again, SDR, same-day registration, is in your precinct if the voter lives in your precinct. So don't get turned around about when you give the voter their options. We want to give the voter their options. But when we proceed with SDR, it's in our precinct if the voter lives in our precinct. Finally, section D, and we're almost done here with this. This one's pretty straightforward. Voters marked as already voted. Maybe they checked in during early voting and they forgot. Maybe, like I said, their son or father came in earlier in the day and they've got the same name, they live at the same address. Whatever the situation is, they can't be checked in by the check-in table. And they can't, their only option there is to vote a provisional ballot. And so your option, what you need to do there is double check that you've got the right voter and proceed with the provisional. Section E is if you're unsure. You're unsure what situation applies to the voter, or perhaps you're unsure what steps you need to take. As a reminder, the poll pad prompts will give you more information, but if you need further assistance, you can give us a call. If you would call our office or perhaps the voter services line, if you need to look something up about a voter, you can write down what the voter situation is and write down what you're doing for that voter. If it's something you've never seen before, it's the first time you're seeing in the day, really anytime you're unsure. One of the themes of this briefing is give us a call and we're here to help. And that's those numbers are on the inside cover of your Chief's notebook, and where and who you can call for these situations. I mentioned voter support, and there's also general support and tech and emergency support as well. On the backside, the section that's for the provisional specialist of the voter referral worksheet is a checklist. We've been doing a lot of provisional specialist workshops, and we have our provisional basics that provisional specialists have taken. This lays out the entire step-by-step process. It's an 11-step checklist, but it's pretty straightforward what they're going through, or what the process is for every provisional voter. And we've talked a little bit about what's happening through the whole way through here. And here's an example of what it looks like when it's completed. This is what we want to see for every provisional voter when it's done. Check marks, right? It's a checklist, so it gets filled out. And then if there was another officer, say if I were in your precinct, you write down that I was there to help. Unfortunately, I won't be anybody's provisional specialist in this election. This checklist, though, gets returned in envelope number 8. I want to call that out. I want to mention that here. It does not go in the provisional envelope. It might seem kind of natural to insert it into the provisional envelope with the ballot, but that's not where we're asking that be returned, because that's not going to be opened unless and until the electoral board votes to count that ballot. So those go into envelope number 8, which is where a lot of other miscellaneous materials go. These worksheets for each of these voters get returned there. So that was a lot to go over, in detail. We'll stop, we'll back up for a knowledge check here. So Gretchen's going to open this up in just a second here. The question here is, what resources or reference material do you have available to help with these non-routine voters on election day? Answers being Chief's notebook, voter referral worksheet, prompts on your poll pad, giving us a call, or all of the above. So I'm seeing answers coming in here very fast, actually. Almost everyone has answered the question while I was describing it, and we have a 100% success rate on this one. So thank you everyone for paying attention here. Yes, all of the above. All of these are resources to you. We want to help set you up for success with non-routine and provisional voters, because we know it can get kind of tricky. So avail yourself of these resources and don't be afraid to give us a call. Having gone through all of the provisional and same-day registration and non-routine and voter referral worksheet considerations, we spent some time on that. I'm going to turn it back on over to Ravi here as we have a couple more sections or a little bit more to close out here. Ravi?
Thank you very much, Sean. I know it's a lot of information, but there's nothing more important to us than making sure that every voter's vote can be considered and hopefully counted in this election. So it's really, really important to us that every non-routine voter, every provisional voter is handled accurately, correctly, that the procedures are followed, because that's what we've noticed in the past. When a precinct follows the procedures that we have in place, it helps ensure that that voter's vote has the best chance of being counted. So we're almost at the end here. We're at the very home stretch. We have one last section. Gretchen's going to take you through some different preparations that we've done for emergency procedures. And I just wanted to note that this is something that's been an important focus for us as an office for more than a year now. We've spent a lot of time thinking about what are the things that could happen in this election and how can we best prepare ourselves and all of you for them. Gretchen in particular is uniquely qualified to help take us through this. Gretchen has actually been spending her weeknights and weekends in the lead up to the election becoming a certified individual for Northern Virginia that is a member of the Community Emergency Response Team. She'd be one of the folks who would be mobilized if there ever was an emergency situation at a large scale in Northern Virginia. We hope that doesn't occur for our region as a whole, and we certainly hope it doesn't happen on Election Day, but we need to be prepared for anything that may come up. So with that, Gretchen, I want you to take us through the different emergency preparations, and then we'll get everyone sworn in and finish up the main part of our briefing here.
Thanks, Ravi. So before we delve into the emergency preparations in particular, I do want to mention that there is no particular trend we're aware of or particular threat that we are anticipating happening on Election Day. We just want you to be prepared for anything that may come up. With emergency situations, every moment matters. So any time you can do to prepare ahead of time means that things will go more smoothly and you'll be able to act more decisively if an emergency were to happen. So in this last section, we're going to cover a little bit of what our office emergency response looks like, your role in that in reporting issues, how to prepare, and then finally give a brief overview of some of the different types of emergency situations you may encounter on Election Day. So to get started, as Ravi mentioned, this is something that our office is taking very seriously. Before Election Day, we've done a number of things to make sure we're prepared to be able to respond to emergency situations that may come up in the precinct. So to start, we had a pre-election security meeting with a number of different agencies all across the county. Anyone who may have a stake in how things go on Election Day, from police and law enforcement to the public schools to transportation, everyone meeting to make sure we're all on the same page of how we would handle emergency situations as they arrive. We've also done some more hands-on practice, as we've encouraged you all to do with hands-on practice for Election Day, through tabletop exercises. So we've done interagency ones across Northern Virginia and nationwide tabletop exercises as well. So that's essentially a simulation to make sure that we can practice our response strategy to make sure that we are effectively responding to emergency situations as they're reported. And finally, we're doing some robust staff emergency response training. So all of the call takers on Election Day are briefed and prepared to be able to handle and respond to emergency situations as they are called in from you all in the precincts. On Election Day, there's a number of different agencies and partners making sure that we have a coordinated response as well. So our Office Incident Command Center, again, those are those call takers we have on Election Day and everyone deploying appropriate resources as necessary. We have a police liaison located right there in the room with us. So if we're notified about a situation, the police liaison can immediately go coordinate the appropriate law enforcement and public safety resources that they need. More broadly, across the county, we have a countywide emergency operations center. So leadership from all key agencies across the county will be fully mobilized on Election Day so they can respond to situations as they come up in a coordinated and efficient manner. And finally, the 911 call center is primed and ready to go for issues specific to precincts on Election Day. So they have all of the different polling place locations ready, and they have contact information for you all, for the chiefs and assistant chiefs. So if a call is reported from a precinct, they know how to prioritize and respond to that effectively. So in the office, we have a really strong coordinated response. So any issue that we're aware of, we will be able to respond quickly and effectively. Of course, we can only do that if we are made aware of an issue. So that's where you all come in. So any kind of emergency situation, we want you to let us know about it as quickly as you can. So if there's an urgent action where immediate attention is needed, 911 is your go-to. Call 911, get the immediate help you need, and then as soon as you're able to do so, loop us in as well. So as Ravi mentioned, we have a phone line dedicated specifically to having urgent responses to situations. This is the tech and emergency support line. I would encourage you all to take out your phones and add in this number as a contact right now, 703-324-4101, so you can call it quickly. And so if you need something that's not necessarily a 911 emergency, but you still need urgent response from the office, call this and we will respond immediately. We also ask that you not just report issues using this number, but check in regularly with us when there's an emergency situation going on. As developments happen, we need to know about them so we can coordinate and update our response effectively. So please both report issues and provide us regular updates using this tech and emergency support line. And so now you might be asking, what kinds of emergency situations and how do I prepare? And another recurring theme we've had throughout this briefing is that the Chief's Notebook is a really good resource for you. So we have 2 chapters dedicated to emergency preparations. Chapter 14 covers emergencies in general, so overall a little bit of emergency response, and we go in depth into specific situations and how you would handle each one of them. And chapter 15 is new for this Chief's Notebook, covering evacuation procedures specifically. So an evacuation would happen if there was something going on in your precinct and very suddenly needed to change voting locations. So you need to pick up everything essential and move it to an outside location. And then in those types of situations, every minute matters. And so we've laid out the procedures for you so you don't have to waste any time deliberating on what the next course of action would be. It's all laid out for you in chapter 15 of the notebook. So that's what you do before election day. We want you to read all of that and make sure you know those procedures because they're not as helpful for you to be reading that for the first time as an emergency is unfolding. So definitely familiarize yourself with these procedures ahead of election day. And then on election day, your job is to make sure the other officers are aware of those procedures in a more basic manner as well. And so the best time to do this is the morning meeting that you have with your officers before the polls open. So everyone's gathered, everyone's tuned in and attentive and ready to listen to the feedback that you have. So that's when you go over briefly what the different emergency procedures are, go over chapter 14 of the notebook, but then spend some time on the evacuation procedures in particular. So the first one would be designating that outside meeting location. So if you all had to get out of the precinct suddenly, you all have to go to the same spot so you can check in and make sure that everyone's there. So designate that outside meeting location. The other thing to do would be to go over these new evacuation guides, which are new for this November election. So every officer in your precinct has during the day, those yellow during the day guides, like we've got for before the poll, before election day, opening the polls, closing. We also have yellow guides during the day. So each station has handouts people have on hand with instructions about routine voting procedures. And so we were trying to figure out what the best place would be to have evacuation information on hand and easily accessible. And so it's on the back side of these yellow during the day guides. So they'll have this information, they'll turn it over, and they'll have evacuation specific instructions. And so during this morning meeting, you want to go over these evacuation guides with the officers so everyone knows what their role is in an evacuation. We've tried to make it as simple and bite-sized for each different officer station as possible. So everyone takes only a few things, but then together that means that everything is accounted for. So it has evacuation instructions at the top of that sheet, but also importantly, every evacuation guide has 911 instructions. So if there were a situation where you needed to call 911, you're probably panicked and you're not remembering necessarily all the important information. So we've laid it all out there for you. So if you don't remember off the top of your head what the address of your polling place is, or what building entrance you use to get into the building, we encourage you to write all of that down on the evacuation guide ahead of time. So if an emergency situation were to happen, you would have that information readily available. So again, just to recap, in that morning meeting before election day, review emergency procedures with your officers and go over the evacuation guide so everyone knows their role in an evacuation situation. So now I'm going to go into briefly some of the different types of emergencies that may happen in your precinct on election day. I'm not going to go into everything in depth. That's what the Chief's Notebook is for, but I wanted to give you a general sense of how we're approaching these situations. So the first would be a power outage. This could be caused by any number of things, severe weather, building issues, anything like that. But something I did want to emphasize is that voting can still continue through a power outage. All of our voting machines have battery backups. So for at least a little while, we'll have you'll still be able to use the machines as normally. And because you've let the office know, we'll be already on the way to bring you backup equipment or generators or anything that you may need. But in the meantime, use cell phone flashlights for power and keep on voting. If the machines are no longer working, we have contingencies for that as well. So if the poll pads stop working, we have a backup paper poll book to go old school and check in voters on paper. And all of that will be found in the emergency envelope in the black kit. So both the poll book itself and instructions for how to use it. If the DS200s are not working, we have an auxiliary compartment where people can insert the ballots manually without going through the scanner. We've got more information covered about this in the Chief's Notebook as well. If there were a medical emergency, which could happen in your precinct, this could be one of your election officers, this could be a voter, an authorized rep, anyone inside of the polling place could have a medical emergency on election day. You've got thousands of people cycling in and out. And we want first you to call 911 and make sure they get the medical care and attention that they need. After that, to the extent possible, we want you to capture as much information about the incident so we can make sure that we follow up and ensure that they receive proper attention after the incident happens as well. So we have the incident report form on the admin tablet to cover most of these emergency incidents. The medical form is a little bit separate because we ask medical specific questions, including what happens if they get taken to a hospital, things like that. So we encourage you, if there's a medical emergency, to fill out the medical incident report form and capture as much information there as well. Next, we'll cover firearms in the polling place. So for many of you who attended our de-escalation training a few weeks ago, we heard feedback from you that you were not quite comfortable or not satisfied with our current procedures for a firearm in the polling place. So we've listened to your feedback, we've talked as an office, and we've updated our procedures to make sure that you feel comfortable and confident addressing a firearm in the polling place that were to happen. So the first is that Ravi mentioned that we now have signs that will be posted in every precinct, letting voters know that bringing a firearm into the polling place is prohibited by law. You'll have two of these signs. So you'll place one at the entrance to the building to hopefully discourage people from entering before the voting room, and then another sign at the voting room. So if a voter walks in with a firearm, you can point to this sign, have something tangible to say this is not permitted in the polling place. And for some voters, that will be sufficient. Some people genuinely might not realize that they have the firearm on them. They'll return the vehicle, lock it in their car, and return back to vote. If that's not the case and they don't comply, this is where we've updated our procedures to make sure that you know that you can use your discretion to figure out which course of action would most effectively de-escalate the situation. You're going to know the dynamics going on, and you're going to know what might anger the voter or cause more tension, and you'll decide accordingly. Your first option is to let the voter know that they are in violation of the law. They are prohibited from bringing a firearm into the polling place. And you let them know that you can call 911 if the firearm is not removed from the premises. Follow through on that if you need to. Your other option is to have, if you're worried that that would cause more issues and potentially escalate the situation to a dangerous level, then you would try to get the voter in and out of the precinct as quickly as possible to shepherd them through and get them in and out and make sure that there is no further danger. But something to emphasize is that regardless of which option you select, by law, the voter is still permitted to vote. So law enforcement can be called to escort them through the process. They could potentially be arrested at the end of it, but by law, the voter is still allowed to cast their ballot. Of course, that situation is very different if the person with a firearm is actively threatening or using their firearm. That becomes an active assailant situation, and the guidance is very different in this case. So if there were the terrible circumstance where there were an active assailant in the polling place, your course of action would be to quickly determine what the most reasonable way is to protect life for yourself and others in the precinct. And so the common guidance for active assailant situations is run, hide, fight. So I'll talk briefly about what that looks like. That is the order in which you take the different steps. So the first action is to run. So if there is an active shooter or someone else with a weapon in the polling place, leave as quickly as possible. Don't worry about evacuation procedures. Just try to get everyone out as quickly as you can and away from the threat. If that's not feasible, if there is no clear exit, for example, or if for whatever reason you cannot leave the premises, your next course of action would be to hide. So to hide and get out of the line of sight from the assailant. You would try to get in a locked area, behind big heavy objects, anything you can do to get away from the assailant. And your third course of action, if only those two first things, running and hiding, are not feasible, then you do whatever is needed to protect life. So do what you need to do to disarm the assailant, fight, and protect the lives of yourself and those around you. And so I know this is a really heavy topic. I don't want to address this lightly. So if you have any further questions or concerns about an active assailant situation, we've got more detailed guidance of what the run, hide, fight instruction looks like in the Chief's notebook. So I encourage you to read that. If you have further questions or concerns, please reach out to me directly and I will talk with you one-on-one about our procedures in this situation. So something else that could happen similar to an active assailant situation is not necessarily happening in your polling place itself, but potentially in a nearby building. And in that case, public safety officials would potentially instruct you to put your polling place on lockdown. And so that would be similar to a shelter-in-place situation where you're getting to a secure location inside the building rather than evacuating to make sure that everyone is safe and secure. And so every facility has shelter-in-place instructions. They have a location to go to that's the safest in terms of building management. And so that would be another thing to check in with of your polling place before election day is where their shelter-in-place location is and what their procedures are. And that's something you would communicate to the other officers in your precinct as well. Evacuation, we've already covered what the evacuation guides are and how you use them. But just some possible scenarios that might result in evacuation would be a fire in the polling place or a fire alarm. I want to stress that you don't need to see flames for a fire to be a serious threat in an emergency situation. If you hear the fire alarm go off, don't wait it out to see if it's going to go away. Treat it seriously and begin with the evacuation procedures. A bomb threat could be called in. You could be notified of that by phone. You could see a suspicious object in the precinct. That's something to notify 911 about right away and begin with the evacuation procedures. An earthquake has happened actually on election day in Fairfax County about 10 years ago. That could happen as well. That could result in some structural integrity issues for the building, or a gas leak would be another reason why it's not safe to remain inside and you would need to evacuate your precinct. And if there were a reason where you couldn't stay in the parking lot or somewhere near an evacuation situation, there are alternate polling locations that you would be able to move to. And we would provide you more information about that as an office if that situation were to happen, and we would authorize that emergency relocation. So I'll close with just some general guidance about responses in emergency situations. And the first is to use your best judgment. So we have some really robust plans in place. We've got a lot of preparation. We've got a coordinated emergency response, but we can't plan for every contingency. There are a number of different things that could happen and you can't plan around all of them. So it ultimately comes down to a judgment call. You all are election officers because you have good judgment, you're good leaders, and you're good members of your community. And I trust that you will be able to respond effectively in an emergency situation. Related to that is projecting calmness. So in an emergency, you could be panicking inside. I know that I would be. But you are leaders in your precinct, and if in that position of authority, the calmer you project, the calmer that everyone else will be. And that just not only makes everyone feel better, but results in better emergency response as well. You're all going to be working together better and making good decisions. So calmness is contagious, and make sure that you're projecting that for the other officers and voters in your precinct. Third, I've mentioned this kind of throughout, but it is really important to stay in regular contact with the office. We're here to support you, but we can only do that if we know what's going on. So in any interval that's safe to do so, we want regular updates and developments about emergency situations as they happen. And finally, after the imminent threat has passed, we want you to document as much information as possible so we can be able to follow up after the fact as well. And you will do this in the incident report form, which is an electronic form located on the admin tablet. As much detail as you can provide is really helpful. In the past, we've accomplished this on the Chief's notes, the paper incident report form, but the admin tablet allows us to get this information live and respond to it in real time. So we ask that you use the incident report form on the admin tablet so we can get the information from you as it comes in. With that, we'll go into one final knowledge check. So thank you for bearing with us with all that information, dealing with the heavy topic of emergencies, and we'll get started with knowledge check number 4. So this one is, where will the regular election officers find the evacuation guides and get the information about evacuations that they'll need on election day?
And Gretchen, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is specifically where your regular election officers will have access to this information.
That's correct.
So it may not be the first answer you all think of. I can't remember, Gretchen. Can people change the answer after they've submitted it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So you're locked into your first guess. Maybe just a few more moments to get started here. Great. And it will go ahead and share those results. And the correct answer, which the majority of you got, is on the back of the yellow during the day guides. So those of you who answered Chief's Notebook were also correct. Chapter 15 has all of our evacuation instructions. But for the regular officers, they won't be able to flip through the notebook on election day like you will. And so they will have their station-specific evacuation information on the back side of their yellow during the day guide for that station. And so with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Robbie, who's going to have some final reminders for you all.
Thank you, Gretchen. All right, everyone, take a deep breath, stretch those arms and legs. We're at the end. Let's get you sworn in and then go into your Q&A. All right, if you would all raise your right hand and repeat with me. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will perform the duties for this election according to law and the best of my ability, and that I will studiously endeavor to prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse in conducting this election. Thank you and congratulations. You've all been sworn in for this election. The next step is for everyone to take a very brief quiz to receive credit for watching this briefing. You're going to receive an email later today with a link for that. And as a reminder, it's due by this Friday, October 25th. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I know we've gotten, I think, more than 75 questions already, and I believe we've answered all of them in writing. We are going to go through the most important ones that we want everyone to hear the response to here. But if you have any questions, submit them using the function at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get to your question for any reason, feel free to email or call us at any time. We're very fortunate to be joined by a number of office staff that are going to be helping answer your questions and provide some updates here in a moment. We have Cheryl Jones, our Deputy Director of Elections, Bushra Ardalan, our Voter Services and Same-Day Registration Manager. We're about to get a brief update from Sean Stewart, our Deputy Registrar for Absentee Voting, and Florence Brown, our Deputy Registrar for Early Voting Satellites, on how voting has been going so far. We also have our IT Manager, Cord Whitehouse, Clerk to the Electoral Board and Polling Place Liaison, Beth Methvessel, Voting Equipment and Logistics Manager, Tyrone Allen, and of course, our Election Inventory and Supply Manager, the inestimable Kay Garrison. So to kick us off, Sean, do you have an update on how the absentee mail is going so far in this election?
Thanks a lot, Robbie. I do have an update. We're getting it back, but we want some more. So everybody tell your friends, tell your family members, tell yourselves if you happen to apply for an absentee ballot. Take it off the kitchen table, take it off the fridge, potentially pull it out of the recycle bin, mark it, fill out that envelope and get it back to us, everybody. We'd love to have it. Robbie, thanks for giving us the chance to update. Chiefs, assistant chiefs, great to see all of you today. We've mailed out just over 110,000 ballots. As I mentioned that we've been working on here, we're sitting just shy of 53,000 that have come back to us. So that means more than 50% of those ballots are still sitting out there, and we would love to have them before Election Day because I'd like to hold on to what little hair I have left on the top of my head, and the team would too. So we'd love to see those coming back to us. We've seen some continued robust application activity. Bushra and the the voter services team processing quite a few every day. In fact, I think we sent out another 1,400 ballots yesterday. So that activity is staying up. If you're interested, the last day to apply for an absentee ballot is at 5 p.m. this coming Friday, October 25th. So when you're taking the knowledge quiz, the check that you need to do, you can remember to apply for an absentee or tell somebody else about that. And again, we'll get those processed and coming out. A couple of quick shout outs to members of your team, the greeters or the Dropbox monitors. We appreciate their work coming up on Election Day. We've seen quite a few ballots. In fact, of that 53,000 back, almost 20% of them have come back by Dropbox. We expect to see a large volume coming back on Election Day. So we appreciate the work of your officers getting those back to us that night, or back in the Dropbox to get to your collector officers, which are the next folks I'd like to give a shout out to. Collector officers, the absentee team looks forward to seeing you as we always do on election night. We're going to continue, or you can let your collector officers know, we're going to continue with the setup we had back in June. We hope that process worked well, and from the feedback it did, we look forward to seeing them back with us with trip lock bags of all varieties, be they full, mid-sized, or one single solitary ballot. We'll also expect to see those sealed purple pouches and the provisional 1A envelopes. We'll look forward to getting all those back to us as well. In short, your colleagues here in the absentee division are excited to see what happens for you on election day. We'll be working away in the weeks leading up to it, and hoping that while you're out there taking care of it on election day, that our mail volume is light, because we got everything back the week before. So last thing I would say to you is that, again, we appreciate all the work that you do. And because I don't want to let Ravi down, I will say this to you. Much like the Kansas City Chiefs, you folks will be undefeated on election day when you're serving the voters of Fairfax County. We appreciate all that help. And now I'm going to step out of the way, not only because it's lunchtime, but because Ravi's going to pass it over to the real star of early voting before election day.
Thank you, Sean. And we appreciate your shout out to the Chiefs. I'm still annoyed that the Kansas City team is doing so well this year, but that's all right. The Commanders are doing pretty darn well too. Flo, do you have an update for us on early voting?
Hi, Robbie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I do have an update on early voting. I'm happy to report that we are just north of 100,000 voters so far in early voting. We had our biggest day ever this past weekend. On Saturday, we had 15,000 voters come through our doors across 16 locations. It's not too late for you to early vote, so please pass the word on to your elections officers on your rosters, as well as your friends and family. We have 2 more Saturdays of early voting, this coming Saturday and our final Saturday, which is November 2nd. We also have voting on Sunday. So we will be open this Sunday, October 27th, from 1 to 5. Our office hours, our our hours on Saturday are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So please come and see us. We're trying to beat all of the records this time. So please come and see us. Back to you, Ravi.
Thank you so much, Flo. Between Sean's operation, your operation, we love seeing so many people that choose to vote before election day, but we're also really excited about all the folks that do want to vote on election day and see all of you lovely chiefs and assistant chiefs and be processed on election day. With that, let's jump into our Q&A. Jean, do we have some questions? I think we had a question first for Cheryl. Is that right?
We do. We're going to have our whole team here teeing up the questions. So we're going to hand this off to Susan to get us started.
There we go. Can you hear me now? So Cheryl, question for you. Apparently Virginia has a new digital driver's license. Is that an acceptable ID?
I say yes. We've not heard otherwise because it's an official document and it's an original digital ID, much like the student IDs that are digital. It's not a photocopy of your own ID. So if someone presents it, and I've not seen one, but I'm sure that there's a barcode on there and it might even scan. I don't know how that would work. But yes, if it's a digital ID, I think you can go on the DMV website and see what they actually look like. This will be a first.
Great. And a quick question about voters, also for Cheryl, in the voting place. We know election officers are expected to wear business casual without any political information on them. What about voters? Is there a restriction on what they can wear in the polling place?
Not at all. They can come in dressed for the election day party. They can wear anything. They can have whatever they want on their hats. It's all part of the First Amendment.
Great. And
oh, go on.
Sorry. No. Go ahead and finish.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Do you have another question?
No, I was just going to take it over to Beth.
Oh, if I could just say real quickly, thanks again to everybody. And remember that most all of us here working in the office have been election officers and chiefs in the precinct. We've been in the trenches. We know what you're going through. We've been out there. I did 2 elections as a chief and assistant chief. And we know it's going to be a very busy time for you. But you all are the front line of democracy for us. Like I said, we're here to support you. We want everything to go well. Don't hesitate to give us a call. And all you folks doing the provisional ballots, take your time and make sure they're done correctly. I just want to get that plug in because we see errors every election that just shouldn't happen if people would just follow the instructions, think, or call us first. We don't want a voter to be denied their vote because of a mistake that was made by an election officer. That's all. Thanks, guys. It's going to be fun.
Thanks, Cheryl. So over to Beth. We had a bunch of questions about pages. Are chiefs supposed to get in touch with their pages before Election Day?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate all the questions about our election pages. The election page, the student page, is part of your election team. They took a 2-hour training. They passed a quiz on that training with 100% in order to receive an election day assignment. So they will be part of the efforts that you make to reach out to your election officers. Please reach out to them as well. Sometimes it's better to reach that to get in touch with them using their phone number and texting them. So I get quite a few emails and phone calls from students wondering why their chiefs haven't reached out to them. So yes, please do get in touch with them before Election Day.
All right, and so what are the shifts for the pages, morning and afternoon?
The morning page will arrive at 5 a.m. and they will stay until 1 p.m. The afternoon page will arrive at 12:30 p.m. and they will be allowed to leave at 8:30 p.m. So there's a little bit of an overlap during the day. So the morning page can tell the afternoon page a little bit about what they've done and get them up to speed before they leave for the day.
Great. And one last quick question. Can pages monitor the absentee ballot drop box?
The pages cannot monitor the drop box. That's a job for an election officer. I think there was another question about whether they could be one of the officers that goes out for curbside voting, and that's something they cannot do. They can certainly observe the process. That's what they're there for. This is a service and learning project for them, so they are able to move about freely, performing tasks as they are assigned. I think that the Chief's Notebook has an outline in it of what pages can do. Ravi went over that in the training as well. So, but if you have any other additional questions on Election Day or even before then about what pages can do, please feel free to reach out and give me a call, ask me.
Great, thanks, Beth. Moving on to Bushra, provisional voting questions. So if a voter shows up to vote, they're not on the poll book, but they say they already registered, that they should be on the poll book, do they do a same-day registration?
I think I'm going to jump in because I think Bushra just ran down because we've got some same-day registrations going on down the way. But first of all, make sure that they're really in your precinct. Make sure they live there. And if they've been registered in Fairfax County before, let them know they can go back to their old precinct. But if they're living in your precinct and they want to register there, then you give them an SDR. A lot of people think they're registered because they filled out an application and mailed it in or whatever, but it was after the close of books, or they may have checked a box at the DMV. But we hold all the registrations that came in after close of books, which was a week ago, until after the election. So they think that they've registered, but it was after, it was after the deadline. So when in doubt, give us a call. We can always check and make sure about things. And you can't go wrong giving them an SDR if they're in your precinct, if they actually live in your precinct.
And if I could jump in on that, Cheryl, for just a second, what you described just now is definitely one of the others reason codes that I've seen on a provisional, where the voter says, I registered, but why am I not on the poll book? It's because it was after the close of books. So thanks for mentioning that that would be an SDR, because effectively at that point, it's being held until after the election. So they need to do a same-day registration.
Right, right. All right, and let's get this question out. Also, Cheryl, is the ID confirmation statement an acceptable ID for a HAVA voter?
No, it can only be used to vote the Virginia ballot. But HAVA has slightly different rules. For example, they just require a photo ID such as a driver's license, but it doesn't have to be a Virginia driver's license. Remember, HAVA is a federal law. So they can show up. Suppose they just moved to Virginia last week. They want to register to vote, or they've registered to vote, but they have to show an ID. They can show their Wyoming driver's license, but they can't vote with their Wyoming driver's license. But the Wyoming driver's license fulfills the HAVA requirement, and then they can do an ID confirmation statement. Now they can get around that by showing a utility bill, or their some other government, a passport, or a military ID, or their government a government ID. Then that serves both purposes. So you're rarely ever going to run into this situation. It's only going to be someone who's just moved to Fairfax and they don't have their driver's license yet. But the chances are they've got something else. Maybe they've registered their car. Or like I said, they've got something else. But when in doubt, again, call the office. We'll guide you through it. We'll give you clear information.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Let's move over to Cord and get some equipment questions answered. Cord, do officers need to update the poll pad during setup or on election morning?
Yes, on election morning, you do not need to do any update to the poll pad. We're doing the time-honored tradition of you don't change stuff in a presidential election, and we're going the same procedure that if you worked March or you worked June, where we are updating the poll pads ourselves on the Sunday before the election. We're doing a big in-house project. So when you pick up your poll pads from your distribution center, they will be ready to go for you. So you'll just need to open them up on election day and begin to use them.
Great, thanks. That's so much easier than it used to be. Another question about poor cell service in the precinct. What do they do if they have poor cell service and their admin tablet or poll pads or whatever is having problems connecting?
Yeah, so specifically for the poll pads do not need a cellular connection during the day while voting is happening. They talk to themselves amongst a Wi-Fi connection that they build, and that's how they stay updated between each other, you know, who has come and who has checked in. But they don't need a cellular connection up to the cloud on the internet at that point. Now, the admin tablets for submitting your forms, they do require an internet connection. So all of the admin tablets are activated on AT&T cellular. And unfortunately, we do have locations where you don't get good cellular signal, either because AT&T is not strong in the area, or, you know, just the composition of the building makes it so that cellular doesn't penetrate well to where you are. If it's a school location, we have worked with the schools to be able to use their Wi-Fi. So your admin tablet should automatically connect to school's Wi-Fi. Unfortunately, if you're a other location besides a government facility or a school location, and you don't have good cellular signal, then we can't connect to the Wi-Fi there because we don't have a way to verify the authenticity of it. The one suggestion I could make, if you did have a break and you were able to take the admin tablet possibly outside, or maybe even just over towards a window where it might be able to pick up a little bit better signal, that might be your best bet. If all else fails, you can always, there's usually either a paper form you can submit in lieu of the digital form on the admin tablet, or you could call in results to the office for like the turnout surveys.
All right, great. Thanks for those tips. And let's switch over to Steve now to ask some questions of the rest of the panelists.
So Gretchen, I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, are election officers required to participate in the Monday site setup?
Thanks, Steve. That's a good question. And so the answer to that is no, it is not a requirement for the regular election officers. It's strongly encouraged, both to make sure that there's enough support on election day or on the day before, that the chief has enough help. But it's also a good chance to meet the other officers in your precinct, drive to your location ahead of time, really kind of visualize the process for the next day. But it's not a requirement. Some people can't take off an extra day of work, or there's otherwise they have obligations on the day before that wouldn't prevent them from serving on Tuesday. So if you are running into trouble or you think you don't have enough officers available to help you with that Monday site setup, reach out to your rover. They may be able to help you out as well. So not required for officers, and you can reach out to your rover if you think that's going to be an issue, having enough help on Monday.
And Gretchen, a second question for you. Can my collector officers come back into the precinct after they drop materials off at the government center to help with closing?
Another good question, and another answer of no. So the collector officers, their job is done after election day, and they are not allowed to return to the precinct. It's very kind of them to want to offer and help and pitch in with the team, but they have finished their duties. They've left the polling place, so they are not able to return after they drop off the materials.
Great, thank you, Gretchen. Sean Rogers, I've got a couple questions for you. What types of IDs can a voter present to be eligible to complete a same-day registration?
Sure, thanks. Good question. The answer is any acceptable ID that you would otherwise present for voting, anything that's on the Virginia Acceptable ID list. So it's the exact same. It's the ID for voting. It's not different because it's a same-day registration. So anything that you would otherwise use is also good for an SDR.
And a second question for you, Sean. Can we ask someone if they're a U.S. citizen?
Sure, the answer is definitely not. So two circumstances here, either at the check-in table or during the SDR process. I'm not sure, so I'll explain both of them. At the check-in table, if they're on the poll book, they'd be processed as normal. If they are doing the SDR process, they are affirming under felony penalty that they are a U.S. citizen. So at no point would you, as the election officer, pose that direct question to them, just as if you wouldn't ask if they're over the age of 18. Cheryl, do you have anything you want to mention about that, or did that get it about right? Oh, maybe not. Ravi? I think that pretty much got it.
Yeah, they handled it. I think Cheryl had to leave for another meeting.
Any other questions?
No, I think I'll turn it to Jean for further questions.
Yes, we do still have some more questions. Our next question is for Kay. I always have trouble finding my admin tablet in the black kit. We're getting 2 admin tablets for this election. Will they be packed the same way as they were before?
Yes, they will be packed the same way, but there is some changes with it. They'll be packed in this little bag. I don't know if you can see it or not. They come in different colors. So it doesn't matter what color you get, but you'll have 2 admin tablets in there. The cord and the charger will be in there too. They all fit. So that should be a little easier to find. It's a plastic mesh bag, and it'll be at the back end of the kit, the center section.
Okay, I have a quick question for you.
Okay.
Is it true? I hope the answer is no, but is it true that this is perhaps your last election with us and you're retiring after this election?
I think that is absolutely true.
I can tell you we will all very sorely miss you after this election. I think we did the count, and you've been with our office for about 14 years now, and with the county for almost 27 years. And in the time you've been with us, I think this will be your 52nd election.
Wow.
So for all of you as chiefs and assistant chiefs, if you see Kay tomorrow or the next day at the chief open house, by all means, please do stop by and tell her thank you for all she's done.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you. It's been fun. Through thick and thin, but we've made it. Thank you.
We got 2 more weeks to go for this election, Kay.
I know.
Jean, do you have another question?
Yes, I have a question for Tyrone and then several for you, and then we'll wrap up for the day. I appreciate everyone's patience as we get through this. Tyrone, we've heard that there will be ballots in one or both of the DS200 ballot bins, and we have to unload the cages, unload the scanners from the cages with those ballots still in there. Is that going to be hard?
It will be. It adds a lot of additional weight to the uh, base of the DS200 scanners. So as we have pictured, and you will find in the chief's notebook, it's not a single person operation. Anticipate the additional weight and be able to um, use a team to remove those machines from the cages. For those of you who have the modified cages, it's even more uncertain as to the weight because the DS200s are facing each other. They've been turned to the side in order to accommodate the two in the cage. But with the team, it's very easy to remove them very safely, bring them out of the cage and put them on the ground, then open them up and remove your ballots.
Thank you,
Great question.
Thanks, Tyrone. Now on to Ravi. And sort of a segue from the question about unloading the scanners. In past elections, we've been directed to open both scanners, but just turn one around and keep it as kind of a backup. Should we use both our scanners actively throughout the day or just keep one off to the side?
Yeah, good question. So in this election, like always, we want you to open both DS200s. And in this election, it's a large presidential election. We want you to actually utilize them, have voters scan ballots on both DS200s. So it's not set up both, turn one around as a backup. It's set up both, use them both. So that way you can make sure you process your lines as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. And after the closing, when the officers are securing the voted ballots, do they need to separate the ballots by scanner since they are going to be using both? Do they mix them or keep them separate when they pack those number 3 boxes?
So during closing procedures, when election officers are boxing ballots for each DS200, the ballots that come out of each DS200 separately should be boxed in separate boxes. So you've used two DS200 scanners, you likely are going to have to use two boxes. You will have to use two boxes, excuse me. And if you have a lot of ballots in each DS200, then you may have two boxes of ballots from one DS200 and a different two boxes for the other DS200. And this is actually really important in this election because we are participating in what's called a risk limiting audit after this election. All 133 localities in Virginia are doing that, where we are going to be required to audit the ballots and go through and review ballots for possibly two different contests in this election. So risk limiting audit is kind of like a mini recount, but for doing that process, it's very important that the ballots are boxed separately from each DS200.
Right, and I think the label for the number 3 box you do indicate which scanner it's for.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. One more equipment question, then we'll move on to more procedural things. Is the express vote ever used for curbside voting? And how would we do that? Someone is concerned about the weight. Do you hold that thing up to the car door window?
Yeah, so it's very rare, but if you need to, you can take an express vote out for a curbside voter. And in this election, with some voters that may need to vote a federal-only ballot or presidential-only ballot, which is only handling the express vote, it is possible that you may need to do that. We think it's fairly unlikely, but it is possible. So if you do need to take an express vote outside, 2 officers should do that. Be very careful, be mindful of the weather, don't drop the equipment, use an umbrella if it's raining. But yes, that is an option that you can do.
Great. Well, hopefully nobody will have to do that, but we'll be prepared. We've heard that there's multiple envelopes 1A now, and some precincts may get extra ones if the office thinks there might be a lot of same-day registrations. Do the chiefs and assistant chiefs have to return, the collector officers? Do the collector officers return every envelope 1A, even if it's not used? How do they do that?
Yes. So in this election, as we said, we're expecting a very large number of provisional ballots and same-day registrations. So at the end of the day, when those get placed into the 1A envelopes, you may have quite a few and they can't fit into just one of the 1A envelopes. So you're going to keep all of your SDRs separate from your non-SDRs. They may take up 1, 2, possibly more 1A envelopes each. You fill those up and then return any unused envelopes on election night as well. You can leave, if you have extra envelopes that you didn't have to use, you can leave those unsealed, but you do need to return all of them, please.
Okay, so to recap, if you got 3 envelopes, 5 envelopes, 2 envelopes, you want them all back.
Correct. Return them all.
Fantastic. Can you talk through the process of how to handle a situation where a voter has been challenged? Who can challenge a voter, and how does that voter vote if they vote?
Sure. So as my colleague Sean Rogers mentioned earlier, this is when the affirmation of eligibility form would be used. So this is fairly rare. We don't see it very much, but it is always possible that an individual in the polling place, whether that's another voter or perhaps an authorized representative, may choose to challenge the eligibility of a voter who's checking in to vote. To do that, what would happen then? That individual would establish that I'm challenging the eligibility of the voter here in front of me. And the challenger would have to complete the affirmation of eligibility and attest to why they are challenging that voter. They'd have to establish it's because, I don't believe this person, I have reason to believe this person does not live at the address that they say they live at, or this is not the individual who they say they are, right? Maybe the person who's checking the vote says they're a name and the challenger knows that that name is their neighbor and the person in front of them is not their neighbor. Again, this is extremely rare, but it is possible. Or if someone wants to challenge the citizenship of someone, they would need to know that this person is not a citizen. So if this happens in your precinct, what you would do is you would have the challenger complete the part of the affirmation of eligibility where they have to establish the specific reason for why they're challenging the voter's eligibility. And then the voter who is being challenged completes a different part of the affirmation of eligibility form, essentially to say, yes, I am who I say I am, and yes, I am eligible to vote. And once they do that, that voter is then permitted to vote normally. So it doesn't become a provisional ballot. It's not something different. Once that voter completes the affirmation of eligibility, they do get to vote normally and their ballot is scanned on the DS200. If this happens in your precinct, if you have someone challenging a voter, or especially someone challenging many voters, please let us know. Give us a call in the office and we can walk you through that process in more detail.
Thank you for that clarification, Ravi. I appreciate that. Our final question is, what should we do if a voter insists that their ballot be hand counted?
Sure. We got this question a lot earlier this year and it actually never materialized in the precincts or on election day. But if an individual, if a voter comes in and they say they really want their ballot to be hand counted, you can let them know that Virginia law requires us to use the voting equipment that has been established. So in this case, that's the DS200 scanners, and that ballot needs to be scanned into the DS200 to be counted. The voter does not have the option of requesting that their ballot to be hand counted. And if a voter intentionally defaces their ballot in an effort to make it so that the scanner can't read it, then what you would do is you would offer them another ballot. If they do it again, you could offer them another ballot, ask them to vote on the express vote. But if they keep doing this, or they attempt to leave without scanning that ballot properly, they are essentially breaking the law. Call us in that situation. We'll walk you through it. But again, we heard rumors about maybe this might happen earlier this year. It didn't actually happen. So, and we have no reports that we expect this to happen in this election. But if it does, call us and we'll walk you through it.
Great. That is all the last question.
Oh, wonderful. Well, all of you as chiefs and assistant chiefs always have wonderful, challenging questions for us. And I can tell you, for all of us here in the Office of Elections, we love getting those questions. Those are the ones that keep us on our toes and make it an interesting process for us to know how would we handle all these different situations. But let's take a big step back here. In the year 2024, this is now our third major election of the year. We had our March presidential primary election, which was a very busy election. We had our June dual party primary election. It was our first dual party primary in some time. And now we're coming up on this large and interesting presidential election. A presidential election always brings interesting new challenges and issues. But what I can say is that I so appreciate not just all of you as election officers and chiefs and assistant chiefs stepping up to serve in this election, but also all of my colleagues here in the Office of Elections, all the folks who are working as early voting election officers, all the people working in our central absentee precinct to process absentee ballots. It takes a village, truly, to conduct an election. And I want to say thank you to everyone who has stepped up in some way in this election, in our office, at a polling place, or anywhere else. At the end of the day, We've done everything we can to try and prepare you for this election, but there will be unexpected situations or issues. And when that occurs, simply give us a call here in the office. As Gretchen shared, we're going to have a comprehensive incident command center with a police liaison here to help us with any type of security or emergency issues. We'll also have tons of policy experts from all parts of our office ready to take calls in the different call centers on election day. So just remember, we're here to help support you and guide you through this election, but you are the people in the precincts on election day, assisting and processing every voter that comes through. We're seeing incredibly high interest and engagement in this election. We've seen a lot of people choose to vote before election day, but we think we're going to see more than 300,000 people vote on election day. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your patience as we went through all the important updates and reminders for this election. I know this briefing went a bit longer than we thought it would, but we really appreciate your very interesting questions, and we hope we've answered them all. If you have any further questions, feel free to call us or email us anytime between now and election day or on election day, and we'll be happy to answer them. So with that, on behalf of all my colleagues here at the Fairfax County Office of Elections and the Fairfax County Electoral Board, thank you for your service in this coming election. We hope you have a great election, and take care and have a great November 5th. Thank you very much, everyone.